afternoon, everyone. Those at the back, can you hear me okay? Is that all right? Brilliant. I've got a thumbs up. I'm going to take that as read. Brilliant. It's lovely to see you. My name is Jessie Wild, and I'm the Deputy Project Director for the Bristol Housing Festival. And before we get into any of the exciting stuff for this afternoon, I'm just going to do some practicals, some really basic things. So if you need the toilet at any point, if you go through this door and turn right, or through that door and turn left, toilets are over there. We've got a photographer with us this afternoon over here to my left. So if you don't want your photo taken or want, to make sure that you're not featured in anything, please make sure you flag that with Jonty. Wonderful. We are also going to be live streaming this event on YouTube for those that couldn't come out to the venue this afternoon. That is being done over here on this red telephone. So again, if you want to not be on YouTube, my best advice is don't come forward of that red phone. So because if you come into that shot, you could well be on YouTube, starring for everyone to see. So watch out for that. Finally, in terms of COVID regulations, we've got the windows open. There's hand sanitizer at the back. If you're moving around the rest of the M shed, we've been asked that everybody keep their masks on, so if you're in the public spaces. But in here, you're welcome and free to take the mask off or wear it if you wish. But beyond that, I'd like to say a big, massive welcome to you this afternoon now actually. It's lovely to see so many people in a real life, in-person event. It's lovely to actually chat to some people, have a cup of coffee and say hello. So the purpose of today's event, and I'm sure most of you have already seen that the title is Building Tomorrow's Communities. We're looking to showcase and celebrate community-led housing this afternoon and look at how it can directly help to address some of the challenges that are being faced by the city and beyond. We want to say a massive thank you to Power to Change and the community-led Homes Enabling Hub programme for enabling this event, enabling it to be put on this afternoon. So a massive, massive thank you to them. So as I mentioned, I'm from the Bristol Housing Festival, and we are in the middle of a 2-week annual expo. So every year around this time we put on a kind of an expo, 2 weeks worth of events, all surrounding the idea of innovation in housing, and particularly looking at how housing can be an enabler to help us solve some of the biggest challenges that we face in our nation. We all know that we're facing a housing crisis, and that's kind of affordability, but it's also the availability, the suitability of that housing. We know we're facing a climate crisis, an ecological crisis. We're now facing post-pandemic recovery and everything that means. We're facing construction skills shortage. I mean, if I keep layering those things on, you see that it is a bleak story. But actually, in that bleak story, there's a real opportunity to start to do things differently and to look at how we can use this opportunity to innovate and really bring the best out of all the people that exist within our communities. So I'm really excited that this event is one of these 2 weeks of the Housing Festival lineup of events. We've been going all last week and we'll be continuing into this week. So if you're interested in what we're doing, do check out our website, the Bristol Housing Festival website. And if you've missed any of the events you're interested in, you can watch them back on YouTube. But as I said, the purpose of today is to celebrate specifically and to showcase community-led housing and how it can really help, directly help, to address some of those challenges that I just mentioned. So over the course of today, we are going to be having a number of different panels that will be interspersed by different breaks, coffee breaks, loo breaks, etc., etc. And then at the end, please do stay and have a few more nibbles and some drinks with the rest of the team. There will be an opportunity to ask questions. So if I ask you within the panels, if you save your questions to the end of each panel, and then whoever's hosting, I'm doing a few, Paul Hassan will do one of them as well. If you save your questions to the end of each panel, and then there'll be an opportunity and an invite for questions at that point. But enough from me. I'm now going to introduce Steve Dale from Community-Led Homes West, who's going to take us through the first few opening speaks. Thank you so much.
The main requirement of being a speaker today is that you need to wear a blue suit. So be prepared for lots of blue suits. So I apologise in advance. Thanks, Jessie. My name is Steve Dale. I'm the Chief Executive of Bristol Community Land Trust and Community-Led Homes West. And this is quite a big day, really. It's the first day that we've come together as a community-led housing sector, and for many of us, it's the first time we've come together in any kind of numbers for a very long time. And certainly today, I'm meeting people that I've been working with for the last year and have never met. So it's quite a special day in lots of ways. And we've got much to celebrate in Bristol and the wider West of England region. And today you'll hear about local projects that are challenging the traditional way of building and living. And they're taking what's strong in a community, its passion, its skill, its understanding of what local people need, and using it to address what's wrong. Unaffordable rents, insecure tenures, isolation. And you'll hear how done right, housing can be so much more than just a roof over people's heads, but a tool for individual empowerment and community development. So the UK housing market is officially broken, and you don't need me to tell you that. You'll have a view on what's wrong and how to fix it, and that's kind of why you're here. You'll have had those conversations at the kitchen table or down the pub, and community-led housing is about unleashing the skills, the resources and the creativity of ordinary people to meet those challenges. And that's why I'm here. And my background isn't in community-led housing, or even housing, in fact. It's in volunteering and volunteer engagement. And volunteering is the art of helping people to use their time, their skills and their energy to do incredible things which benefit themselves and the wider community. And so I know a little bit about community action, and I'm very happy to welcome so many colleagues from Bristol, the West of England and beyond, who are experts in housing. So welcome and thank you. So that said, I did once build a house. And it was a straw bale house, and as some of you may know, the beauty of straw bale construction is that anyone can do it, even me. And there isn't really any part of that process that can't be done by an ordinary person with a small amount of training. As it happened, I got my training right here in this building. So we took a group of young people who were all under the age of 16, and we, from a school outside Bristol, and we built a house on a farm in under a week. And so that's my building credentials. And when I was, so I've been in post for a year, and I, soon after coming into post, I had a conversation with someone who may or may not be in this room, and was just showing off about my straw bale house, and she soon started asking me questions I couldn't answer about things like planning permission, and then kind of unsatisfied with my answers, she pointed out that basically my track record with housing consisted of having built an illegal dwelling using child labour. So I'm not here to lecture you about housing. But that's not really why I'm talking about straw bale house, because it's a metaphor, and it's a metaphor for our sector, community-led housing. And much of the activity that you'll see showcased here today has been pump-primed by funding, from government funding over the last 3 or 4 years. And we have landowners, such as local authorities, offering land for community-led housing. Dozens of community groups have risen to the challenge. We have investors coming in behind these groups to support their vision. We have a community-led housing hub in CLH West, which is hosted by BCLT and driven by many of the people in this room, providing the technical expertise that these groups need. So that government investment has delivered, and the genie is now out of the bottle. And across the region, those kitchen table conversations that we all have been turned into architect sketches, community consultations, business models, funding bids, financial projections, and planning applications. So the pipeline is flowing. And much has been achieved, but there's still so much more to do to ensure that community-led housing meets its full potential. And so, a straw bale house, or any house for that matter, needs a good hat and a decent pair of boots, and it needs. And the foundations of our sector in Bristol and the surrounding area goes back decades. You'll hear a bit more about that today. But more recently, government funding has enabled us to build on those foundations and throw up the walls. But it needs a roof, and without the roof, our walls and floors will be a soggy mess in no time at all, and that's why we're here today. So we need to protect the investment that we've all made, we need to safeguard our pipeline, we need to ensure that the steady supply of land, finance, technical support and communities who are willing and able to develop homes keeps coming. So there's currently no blueprint for that roof. We don't know what it looks like. And there's no guarantee that any one organisation or investor is going to come forward and build it for us and finance it. But between us, through collaboration and thinking creatively and holistically, I believe we can do it. And this event is the first step in building that roof, building a strategy for community-led housing for the West of England. And today we're having a conversation about the opportunities and the barriers to community-led housing. And we'll take the learning from today, and over the next weeks and months we'll continue the conversation and create together a vision and a strategy for building tomorrow's communities. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce you two Toms who are going to be very important in, first of all, setting the context for today, but also in helping us to deliver over the coming weeks, months and years. So I would like to introduce Councillor Tom Reynard. In actual fact, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Tom.
Thank you, everyone. The perils of playing five-a-side football and not warming up properly is a lesson I've learned very harshly a couple of weeks ago. Thank you for having me along today. It's really exciting to be here. So I'm Councillor Tom Reynard. I currently hold the Housing Delivery and Homes group in the Bristol City Council. I was newly elected in May, and then I think was appointed about 3 weeks later. So there's been a lot to get up to speed with, which has been quite interesting. And not least kind of understanding, some of which I actually know from my own perspective, having rented for many years and now in my own home, some of the challenges and problems that we have with housing in the city, whether that's extortionate rents, the lack of protections that there are for those that are renting the private rented sector. We're not building the homes quick enough that we need to be. We've got 16,000 people on the waiting list for housing in this city, 800 in temporary accommodation. You know, the scale of the challenges are huge. And it's going to take many pieces of the puzzle coming together in order for us to solve the housing crisis. And one that's, it's not going to be a quick solution, but we need to be doing what we can as quickly as we can. And so coming into this brief, one thing I've been really excited about is the work that's happening around community-led housing. It's sort of, some of the meetings I go into can be quite grim at times, and so I come to the ones with Steve and it's like, excellent, look at all this energy, enthusiasm, the work and the plans that there are. And for us in Bristol, community-led housing is a really important part of the puzzle as we work together to solve the housing crisis. Having gone around some of the schemes, including the one that was on the front slide there on Fishponds Road, it has been really nice to see what can happen when you empower communities and give them the tools and enable them to be able to find their own solutions to the challenges that we're facing. And so we need to be doing more of that and not less of it, and just really make sure that we embed the learning as well, because what we're also talking about is different ways of doing things, and our systems, our processes, our planning function, they're not necessarily set up to deal with community-led housing in the way that we need it to. And I think really welcome the conversation we're going to have today about some of those challenges and also those opportunities and the things we need to take away and think about within the council to ensure that we continue to enable community-led housing to thrive, not just today, but very long into the future. So I won't be able to stay for all of today, but I'll be in and out, and we look forward to hearing the discussions. And thank you. I will now pass to Tom. Thank you.
Thank you. So your second Tom. Good thing about lecture, it's like a Zoom call. You don't know what trousers I'm wearing, so you don't know if I'm wearing a blue suit. So I'm Tom Chance. I'm the Chief Executive of the Community Land Trust Network. We're a national membership body for CLTs, including Bristol CLT, with members ranging from a 600-home social housing estate in inner London to a handful of homes in Lindisfarne or Lizard, everything, the whole spread. And our aim was recently quite well captured by Canterbury. I don't know if you're aware of this report that the Church of England brought out called Coming Home. And it looked at what role the church should have in trying to address the housing crisis as part of its Christian mission. And there's this quote at the start of it that's really stuck in my head, so apologies to those of you who've heard me say this about 5 times before. He said, if it was homes and communities that mattered and not just bricks and mortar, then the whole nature of the industry would be changed. And I'm seeing some people nodding, and I think what's interesting about that, he didn't just say, we'll do some things differently, he said the whole nature of the industry. And you look at what happens in Bristol, Tom's spoken about some of the challenges of the Steve. It's not that nobody's doing anything good, but there's something systemically wrong about the way that housing operates in this city. And there's something that I think community-led housing can contribute to addressing that. So our mission is not to support a handful of fantastic projects like those we'll hear about today, but to make the commons commonplace, to make this sort of approach the norm. Now, Danny Kruger, an MP just slightly over the border, Boo Hiss in Wiltshire, was commissioned by the Prime Minister last year to do a piece of work looking at what lessons could be learned from the community response to the pandemic, because we all saw it. We all saw also the differential responses and the sort of terrible inequalities in how effectively communities were able to respond to the pandemic. And one of the many, many things that Danny Kruger said was if you look at the role that housing associations and community land trusts have developed working together, as with Brighter Places and Bristol CLT here, as with many, many projects out further in the other way into Somerset and Dorset and Devon, he said that should be the future of social housing, putting land in the ownership of community and communities partnering with housing associations to deliver homes that meet local needs. He saw that as that should be the norm, not just an occasional interesting side project that's tangential to everything else that happens. Then the Prime Minister commissioned another piece of work. I mean, who knows if these are ever implemented, but he commissioned another report this year from Richard Bacon, MP, looking at self and custom build and saying, how can we make this bigger? And Richard again highlighted that the UK is very weird compared to most other developed countries in having most of our housing built by an increasingly, vanishingly small number of volume builders. And companies that aren't really in the business of building good housing, they're in the business of trading land, and then putting as many homes as they can on it to get the profit out of the land. And Richard Bacon's report has an entire section on community-led housing, and again says community-led approaches should be much more normal in the way they are in most of North America, in most of Europe. So those, to me, are two little inklings of how you pick up Justin Welby's challenge. And Bristol, I'm really happy to be down in Bristol because you've always been one of those cities, and in the sort of West England region, that's been vying to be sort of top dog in the community-led sector. There's been so much innovation here. And I'm really excited that I've been here for 2 years to hear about what's happened since I was last speaking at this festival. I think it's the last time I was in Bristol. But I've just been last week around the Merseyside region. I'm going to hopefully make you envious and make you all wish you lived in Runcorn. So we had a gathering of people from around the country to meet and have a day of kind of workshops and boring business work, but then go and visit projects. And I think what's been happening in Merseyside in the last few years should be an inspiration for you and make you think about the ways in which this could be integrated into and become normal in the way that local authorities and communities and housing associations and developers operate. So the first project we went to is in a place called New Ferry, which it might ring a bell if you remember a few years ago there was a devastating gas explosion so large that you could hear the noise in Lancashire and North Wales. And it destroyed a large chunk of the high street. Thankfully nobody died, many people were seriously injured, and it was basically an insurance fraud job gone wrong. Somebody was hoping it would create a fire and instead managed to blow up half the high street. But this high street has already suffered decades of decline as out-of-town shopping centres have sucked the life out of the high street. And when we were there, probably 2/3 of the shops on this high street were empty. And Wirral Council is supporting the Community Land Trust, which has had funding from the Combined Authority to begin to bring life back into that high street. So they first bought an old bank that had closed down. They're renovating that, putting some commercial space at the bottom and some affordable flats in the top. Their ambition is to begin buying up the rest of the high street and doing a similar job as they go, working in partnership with the two public authorities. And those public authorities have an agenda of community wealth building. How can we lock that wealth back in that area and ensure that anything that is generated, the profits from the landlord basically are reinvested into that community? And how can that be a kind of a response to this devastating explosion? Then just down the road in Runcorn, there's a slightly more historic injustice, which is a great big flyover, ploughed through houses in order to get one of the bridges over the Mersey. Compensate the land at the homeowners who lived just either side of the bridge, and if your house actually got knocked down. So your house got knocked down, you kind of got a probably knocked down price for it, and everybody else just got moved out, or had to try and sell their home, and of course nobody wants it. There is now as they've built another bridge, there's a big area there, lots of sort of slightly derelict land, and the council wanted to develop housing on it. And the council took the unusual step, having just seen the launch of Breaking Ground, which is the equivalent to Susan and Steve's outfit in the west of England. Having seen that launch, they went to them and said, look, we would like to do this as a community land trust. So the council is initiating a community land trust on this site, working with the hub to develop the community around it. And we met council officers and some of the people in the local community, and what this could mean to them to bring life back into the old town of Runcorn. There is also just outside there a very large site for a development of about, I think about 500 homes. And there's again an ambition to do a large-scale community-led development on that. So public authorities in that region are thinking this could be the way that we begin to solve problems. This is our default. This is not the, we've got a terrible site, no one else would possibly want, it's sloping in 3 directions, contaminated and protected trees. I know, we'll give that to we'll get that to some self-builders, Rachel, so you can try and stick a tiny home on it. No, they're looking at this as the default.
No idea what you're talking
No, that never happens here. And then in Liverpool itself, one of the really exciting ones I sadly didn't get to visit, but I met a couple of people from, is a new CLT in Toxteth. There's already quite a famous one called Granby Fall Street, which has a very tight focus. But Toxteth, you know, from the riots in the 80s through, has a long and complicated history with slavery, immigration. It's a very, very ethnically diverse part of the city. And the people there are forming a CLT because they see this is the way they have power. And they've been quite inspired by the founding of the Community Land Trust movement in the Civil Rights Movement of the United States. And the Civil Rights Movement in the United States saw if you don't own the land, you don't have the power. And so they are seeing in LA the opportunity to begin to give the, particularly the black community in Toxteth, but the entire local community, real power and control and traction in trying to turn their area around. And that's something I hope, you know, particularly with everything that's happened in the last couple of years since I was here in Bristol, would resonate, is how do you extend this opportunity so it's not just better off, the more kind of able to mobilise and respond to opportunities, but this is really going to benefit all the communities in the west of England. And so I'm really excited to hear what we hear about today, and hopefully, you know, 2 years' time when I come back here, we'll be seeing you're back on top spot and you can go and tell Merseyside what you're up to. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much to all our opening speakers. So, as I said, I am going to be taking you through the journey of today, this afternoon. So first up, we have our first panel, and I am going to invite to the stage a number of speakers, and we're going to look specifically about shining a light on the west of England's innovation, creativity and leadership in the community-led housing sector. So please can I have a round of applause as I invite to the stage Steve Dale, Tom Renhard, Tom Chance, Councillor Bridget Petty and Sally Gilbert from Vital Places. So how this is going to work is I'm going to pass the mic down the line, and each of our panellists is going to have 3 or 4 minutes to introduce themselves, and if they've already introduced themselves this morning, to take a little bit of a positioning statement on what in the west of England, the innovation and creativity and the leadership of community-led housing from the west of England's perspective. And then after that point, we're going to open up for questions, so do start thinking and formulating some of those questions in your own mind. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the time, so I'm going to sit in the front row and watch everyone, make sure that they don't go on too long, and we will just go down the line and go from there. So thank you so much, everyone.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Bridget Petty, and I've prepared a few things. So I'm an elected councillor in North Somerset. So I know to talk about Bristol, but North Somerset being just south of Bristol, kind of all the way from Ashton Court down to Weston-super-Mare, including Clevedon and Portishead. So those familiar with Bristol will be pretty familiar with North Somerset. I was delighted to be invited to participate here, and many of the faces here will know me, because a number of years ago, well, my husband and I were looking and wondering, how are we going to ever afford a home? And actually, do we want to live in a home that we see out there today that we're going to struggle to pay for? Or would we much rather be living in a community where we could know our neighbours, where we could look out for each other? So initially, we started our journey kind of looking around going, how can I be part of something community-led? And that led me to join. So that was many moons ago, but it was a very rewarding experience. So for anybody here who's wondering how to learn a bit more and thinking about it, I do recommend considering being a board member of one of these organisations that does really rewarding work. That then led me to being a staff member at Bristol Community Land Trust. So I joined the team with Sally, and Sally Gilbert was nearby, and we were part of the team who were finishing off Fish Ponds Road. And that's the site that was the photo at the beginning, the picture at the beginning, which was a lovely development where the community had been involved for a long time. It was Bristol Council land, and there was some work that was new houses being built, and there was some work that was restoring a building that had been derelict for a long time. So offering one-bedroom homes for renters where those residents could become part of a community, and they would know that their landlord wasn't going to boot them out soon. Because I think all of us know stories, whether it happened to us or happened to friends, where you might be renting a property and then the next minute the rent's gone up or they're selling, and suddenly the one thing that you thought that you had, you don't have anymore. And I think it was really moving when we helped residents who were single men and women move into somewhere where they knew they had a long-term home. Likewise, supporting families to move in, where again, they'd been on the rental market and they became shared owners, was really an amazing time. And I still consider that a really proud moment to have been part of Bristol Community Land Trust as we faced that. Definitely challenges, definitely hardship, but to see what's been achieved and that people have managed to got really strong homes and that community is really well formed there has been great. So that's kind of reflecting upon that and seeing images of what's coming out of Sheldon Road now. It's been a long road, but and the site wasn't the easiest site to begin with, and so certainly it's not surprising that other people didn't want to develop it, but Bristol Council offered it. And I think that Bristol CLT were right to snap it up nonetheless and work together with partners to deliver that. It's amazing to hear that the residents are getting closer to moving in. So I'm now a councillor, and my friends at what is Brighter Places and Bristol Community Land Trust will know this wasn't really part of my plan. But overnight I became a councillor and became the executive member for climate emergency and engagement at North Somerset Council. So I'm championing the work of declaring the climate emergency in North Somerset and addressing all the emissions and trying to get our area as a whole down to net zero by 2030. As you might imagine, massively bold. But we won't do that unless we work with all our organisations, all our partners, and we have to think about doing so much differently, and housing is definitely one part of that. So right now, the council is developing up a local plan. And for me, the affordability crisis is actually more timely than the housing crisis. Bristol and North Somerset do have different challenges. In North Somerset, we have floodplains and flood zones. We also have green belt. And we know that if we care about climate change, we know that risk of sea level rise is real and imminent. So working out where to build more houses is certainly part of the challenge, but we're developing a local plan, and I think community-led housing can be part of that and is an important part of that. So I think that community housing can be a disruptor in the market, and I think that we need to show them that it's not just about big schemes, but it's about other ways to live. And I'm hoping that I'm promoting some of that in the work that I'm doing at the council, and I'll keep nudging us all in the right direction. But certainly keen always to hear of exemplar examples where people can come along, show us how co-ops, co-housing, community land trusts are solving problems in other parts of the country, so that we can bring more councillors and officers and people at the council along with us in that journey. And thanks for inviting me.
Right, I've got to think of something different to say to what I said about 10 minutes ago. Because I think one of the things for me as well is, as someone that's a labour and cooperative councillor, and someone whose background is also in sort of setting up user-led, community-led organisations, both in terms of Acorn and also a charity called the Independent Mental Health Network, it is really important that we do hand over and trust communities and trust the process and the journey that we're going to go on. And that's certainly something we've been doing with the council. And I know it's not been an easy journey, and I would say to anyone that's been involved in community-led housing schemes, thank you for bearing with us as we go on our own journey. Making land disposals available. Some of those sites were bid on, others were not. And I think one of the things that we're thinking about as we move forward is How do we ensure that there are bids on those sites when we put them back out, along with some new sites? And also, you know, seeing some of the schemes that have actually come forward and either been delivered or nearly there. Sheldon Road, I'm really keen to get to once that is finished. And it's going to be really exciting. 49 houses, isn't it? So, no, it's 50. Sorry, 50. I missed one off. But you know, it's a decent sized scheme. You know, and it proves that community-led housing can also be done at scale. We're not just talking about sites where it's 5 or 10 houses, are we? You know, we're talking about bigger sites as well. So, you know, that's some of kind of what we have been doing. In terms of where we are currently, we're finalising a further land disposal process, which we're hoping to complete by the end of this financial year. And we're also meeting regularly with Steve and the team as well to think about how can we support CLH West and Bristol CLT to enable more groups, more community-led housing schemes to come forwards. And we're currently working through a procurement process and looking at what funding we can put on the table as a council to enable work to happen. I think part of that as well for us presently is also about how we amplify the voice at the West of England level. We know that where we can get a bit more scale and support is by ensuring there's a West of England combined authority buy-in as well. And so that's something we'll be actively championing and working with Bristol Housing Festival and the team here as well on that. So what does the future look like for us? Hopefully more community-led housing, I suppose that's the right thing to say, but also it is really important. We need innovative solutions to dealing with the housing crisis, and we can't keep going on the same way we have been doing, with the same old kind of builders disposing of the land to them when we own it, for them to then maybe build it quickly, maybe sort of sit there, get a scheme through planning, and then sell it on to someone else, because land values are going kind of crazy in Bristol. We know it's a massive issue. So we'll be putting as much support as we can into community-led housing. It will remain certainly a priority for my brief among the others. And you know, let's keep moving forward and let's keep having open and honest conversations as well about those challenges and how we get them addressed. Thank you.
Well, I lived in Bristol when I was 1 and then left when I was 2.5. And what I gather from this is I don't really know anything about Bristol. And I don't really know very much about the west of England, although I've got family living in Somerset. And what I take from this is why we as a national organisation are very supportive of what CLH West is doing. Because we know that land markets, housing issues are very localised. We know that developing those strategic relationships with the councils, with combined authority, with communities, with landowners and so on, really is best done at the local level. So I'm really fascinated to hear from Bridget and Tom and for the rest of the panel and everyone else today about the specific issues here. And what I wanted to talk a little bit about is where that strategy came from of wanting to support organisations like CLH West to take the lead on developing this sector. So the last time there was a real renaissance in community-led housing in the UK, it was cooperative housing in the 70s, and there were secondary development agencies set up all around the country to support new co-ops to form. And many of those co-ops still exist today, although many have failed, or fallen apart, or run out of steam. And the two real lessons we take from that history are, first of all, that those cooperative development agencies set themselves up entirely dependent on a government grant funding programme. And when that funding programme ended, they all disappeared, with one exception, which is one in London. Because that one in London had developed itself into a viable business, with about 1,000 homes of its own, now services about 3,000 other co-op homes across London and parts of the south east. And where that exists, and where there are similar organisations elsewhere in the country, that's where the high concentrations of co-ops are, including actually Liverpool, going back to my earlier theme. So having a local agency, but a local agency that has some prospect of sustainability, is critical for getting growth and for sustaining that growth in the area. The other lesson was that it was, so I just wrapped up I was got two lessons in my head, I was wrapping both up into one same thing. So the first, it was both the sustainability of the hub and also the sustainability of those groups. Those groups were able to be sustained because they had ongoing support from the agency to make sure that they kept their governance robust, that they were financially solvent, they were bringing new blood in and so on. And when we set up the programme to try to support the expansion of these organisations again, we were also looking to the Clt Umbrella Model, which is where, if you look at the country, the map of the UK, competed community land trusts are, they are highly concentrated in the southwest, in Cumbria and in Cambridgeshire. where there is strong support from the public authorities and this enabling organisation helping communities to bring projects through. So we looked at that and we looked at secondary costs. We thought we need to replicate that model, and we need to grow it across the country. And we've had investment from Power to Change, from the Nationwide Foundation, from government, £3 million out of community housing funds going into these enabling organisations. And I'm under no illusions that you're in the sort of foothills of this journey at the moment with CNH West, and it's hugely challenging to kind of grow this approach and to make it sustainable, and with very short-term stop-start funding. So what we're beginning to see in other parts of the country, including Merseyside, but also Greater Manchester and East England, is a real partnership forming between these enabling organisations and public authorities in the area, housing associations, others who are invested in working together to solve the housing crisis. That includes sustaining with funding and creating new partnership opportunities. It also includes replicable approaches to delivering projects, because much as I love going to visit projects that are exemplary and unique and interesting, and you kind of think, you know, there's always like loads of scars on people's backs from the struggles they had to get those projects off the ground. They don't repeat, and you don't begin to change the way the market works in the area. And so I think the really interesting challenge for Bristol, and then for the very varied parts of Baines and North Somerset and Gloucester, South Gloucester, is what kind of replicable approaches can we develop together and with Enabler Hub to get this to scale. So this is no longer just the smallest number of homes, but is actually really driving the housing market in this area. Thanks.
Okay, I was going to hand to you, Sam, and then I thought actually I'm going to pick up on what's next. I was just going to duck out and let you go first and go last. But I'm not. Anyway, so because I just wanted to pick up on on what you were saying, Tom, about replicability. But I'll come to that in a minute. I was just going to give you kind of briefly an overview of what Community Land Trust is, what Community-Led Homes West is, what BCLT is, and how all of that kind of fits together, really. So, Bristol Community Land Trust hosts Community-Led Homes West. So we are on the one hand a developer of homes as BCLT, and we are an enabling hub, helping other people to do what we've done, and in some cases helping other people to not do what we've done. So we've got that kind of twin, that sort of twin role, really. So kind of as an enabler, we acquire and we develop land ourselves, and established in 2011, BCLT built, owns and manages a community of 12 homes on the corner of Bristol Park in Bristol, and which is a mixture of shared ownership and affordable rent properties, imaginatively known as Fishponds Road, because it's on Fishponds Road. And then we have Sheldon Road. Guess where that is? No, it's not actually on Sheldon Road. It's just off Sheldon Road in Lockleys. So that was our second development, and this turned out to be a different approach. We own the land. It's been developed by Sally and Brighter Places team. That's and and one or two other people keep counting. This has been a long road. Keith will talk to you about it at length over a drink at the end of the session. And it's been a huge challenge for everyone involved, and we're nearing the end. And if you speak to the folks at Ecomotive who are dealing with the self-finish right now, they'll also kind of talk to you about that. So a huge development, which I'll let Sally talk about in detail, but as didn't go for Bristol Community Land Trust according to plan. We took a lot of learning out of that, and we're putting that learning back into the sector. The good news is that the housing is nearly finished and the families are moving in soon. So when we talk about community-led housing, we're usually talking about groups who've never done housing before. By its very nature, you have groups of people who are coming together, they're forming around a piece of land or an opportunity, and they've never done housing before, they've never been involved in a project. So, and as was highlighted earlier, they're often given the ropiest bits of land that are the most. So let's give the most complicated pieces of land to the people least well equipped. So, and we've got around the city a number of incredible projects which in many ways have popped up in isolation and without necessarily a structure around them to support them. And what we are doing as Community-Led Homes West is that we are now in a position where we are able to support those groups, we're able to bring the expertise, we're able to align the banks, the investors, the grant funders, and all of the other professionals you need to come in behind to support those groups. And we're able to take the learning from each of those projects and make sure that the things get easier for the groups that come behind. So we're all learning the lessons of what's happened. So we're trying to build, what we've got is a lot of projects, and we've got a lot of excellent projects, but what we're trying to build here is a sector and a movement where we are more powerful if we have one voice. And that's largely why we are here today. And community-led housing kind of encompasses kind of, everything you can imagine. By its nature, you've got people who are trying to disrupt the way things are done. They're doing things in a way that's never been done before. And of course that creates a massive headache for a housing association who might work in partnership, a bank who wants to get behind and support it, and everything else. But that's the space that we're in. And so we have every kind of every model manageable. We've got every model that you can imagine. We've got urban, we've got rural, we've got groups with land, we've got groups who don't. We've got groups who've got buildings and groups who don't have any. We've got co-ops, co-housing, self-build, self-finish, affordable rent, shared ownership, you name it, it's there. And part of the challenge is supporting that kind of innovation and those dreams and helping those communities to do something which is genuinely different, combined with helping them to kind of create those projects in such a way that they will get funded, they will get effectively a mortgage, and that people like local authorities and others will be able to kind of come in and behind the support. And why? Why are we doing it? Because we're not just building homes, we're building communities, and every £1 that you invest in community-led housing is thought to yield a £3 return in the investment in terms of the health and well-being of those people who live in the homes, but also beyond that, the individuals who've been involved in developing it. Because in developing the homes, you're developing skills and knowledge and expertise, confidence and all of those other things. And then you've got the kind of additional benefits that you bring by a housing project being developed in that way. You've got the state that people have in their community, the reductions in crime and antisocial behaviour, and the improvements in health and well-being. And if we've learned one thing in the last kind of 1 or 2 years, or however long the pandemic's been running, it's that we know full well what the weaknesses are in our society and where the strengths are, and what we're trying to do is capture all of that and replicate it, as Tom says, for the future. I'm being told to wrap up, so I'm going to hand over to you, Sally.
Hi. So I'm not actually going to talk about Sheldon Road because it will take a very long time. There's a lot of people here who can talk personally about it, and there are some self-finishers, but I thought I would show you a picture. These are our very colourful homes, and this is just some of the self-finishers. Kids, I see you're not even in there. Oh yes, you are. Fab. And Jackson Dominique, I'm assuming, from Ecomotive, who are, as we said, running the self-finish model there. So, yeah, that's one of the schemes that we're working with BCLT. I think I was asked to speak, as I was cycling here, I suddenly thought, oh, I don't remember what I was supposed to be speaking about. And it was partnership, so I will get on to that, but I also want to throw some big numbers at Tom, the wow factor in Bristol, because I can't bear the thought that people are beating us. We've been on this journey a very long time. Many of the guys in Ecomotive who live in the yard, the self-finish, build scheme down there, and it did take us a while to get going on the next scheme. But Fish Ponds Road was where I started with BCLT, that was, feels like a very long time ago now. And Bridget and I sweated a lot of sweat and cried, I think, didn't we, Bridget? As did Keith and many other people. But it is worth it. And I was thinking again on, just very briefly, on my journey and how, because I think that was one of the partnership and our journey. I'm a building surveyor by profession, and I have an inherent love for buildings or interest in buildings. But I also have an interest in communities, and actually, without communities, buildings have no place. And I love Tom's not principles, but a bit of social history. Homes of women, bricks and mortar. Although those people who know me know that I love bricks, so we'll talk about that another time. So yeah, I did, and I visited my father in very many communes in the 70s. And whilst I'm not suggesting we do that because it's interesting, but probably not for all of us regular people who have jobs and everything else, it does show an inherent need for being part of a community. And you probably want your own space within that community, so your own home, but you want some shared space and some, you know, a bit like the good old days when we all came out without cars, we talked to people, the kids played in the streets. And actually what we're doing, it feels like we're kind of regressing back to that time because people supported one another. And the pandemic has showed that people do support one another. I've got a very good community in which I live. And I've always had that kind of interest in buildings and communities. And I certainly wouldn't be here in Ashram. So I moved to Bristol, had the opportunity in 2000. Started my journey at the council, and I loved every minute of those 8 years I worked there, all the frustrations, all of the other things, but actually meeting a lot of people who want to make things happen and bring land forward, and it has taken us a long time, but actually we're nearly there, and we are producing homes. And I just had a quick look with Caroline, who's our development manager, who manages our programme. And we've got 230 homes in our programme, £55 million worth of investment. So, is that better than Liverpool or not? But they're all in partnership with some amazing community-led groups, obviously BCLT, South Coast Development Trust, Ambition Alliance Western, LMT, Rockley Family Trust, Marshfield Community Land Trust, and many more. And we love partnering them. It's exhausting. It takes up a lot of resource, and we have just appointed a community-led housing officer, development project manager Laura, who's in the front row, and that's our commitment. We know it's a really important part of what we do. We love doing it, but we needed somebody to help us focus on that and not use up my time and make me cry again. Anyway, come and see it when it's finished. We're getting there. The self-finished programme is well underway, and the first homes are due to move in this side of Christmas, I'm saying positively, and the rest of them by February or March or something like that. That's me.
Wonderful, great. Well, we have a little bit of time for some questions and answers. Now, of the panel, you've got one microphone between you, so I'm going to have to ask that you're going to have to pass it between you and only speak if you have a microphone. It's going to be like one of those games with the hat. But I'm going to open it to the floor. Has anyone got any questions straight off the bat? If not, I've got a few backups. Oh, we've got one down here. Lindy,
Yes.
to stand if you're able and give us a good shout of the question.
Hi, yeah. It's actually a question to anyone or everyone in the panel, because I think there's a common theme which was around the coordination. I mean, so Bridget, you're North Somerset. You've got your local plan. So I'm thinking, oh well, what's the role of community-led housing going to be, or how are you going to how is your local plan going to help enable and deliver more community-led housing? And obviously Bristol, Tom's facing the same thing. The other Tom, you talked about the Bacon Review, and keep going on about Liverpool. Come on, what's Wecker doing? And what are you guys doing to get this organised and push. You know, you're the guys with the power. You might not feel like that, but you are compared to a lot of people in this room. So it's like, what are you doing to get WECA on board and get them organised so they can create a structure for people to deliver, and in particular the planning system as well.
Wonderful. So that was a question, if anybody didn't hear it, about coordination and support. I'm going to look to Tom and to and to Bridget.
Not working?
No, but we can hear you.
No. Is it muted by any chance?
Right. Need to learn to operate a microphone. So I think some of the key things for us about what we're doing. So I'm the council's representative on the WECA's Planning and Housing Board. And so one of the things I have been doing is raising it there about the role of community-led housing that it can play. And also I know the team within Bristol Housing Festival have been working closely to make the case as well, because what we want ideally is a West of England-wide strategy, because that will make things far easier and helps you with some of the economies of scale that you can get through that. And also we want to make sure that Bristol CLT is viable long into the future. You know, you heard some of the comments that were raised earlier about co-ops that have folded over the years. So getting it sustainable and putting in that public investment is going to be really important. Helping WECA to understand the value that it brings is going to be the journey we're going to have to take WECA on. It's a challenge umbrella for. Just briefly on planning, I think it'd be fair to say planning's on its own journey within Bristol City Council, and we've been working quite closely with the team to help them think differently about some of the schemes. It's not just been an issue for community-led housing, it's also been for other schemes that we're bringing forward, like modern methods of construction, for example, Airport Road and the Butler scheme, for those of you that are familiar with it. You know, that was a different way of doing things, a different way of thinking about things, and when you've got a planning system that's operated that's largely the same way for decades, you know, it can be a real push. It's a real bit about culture change. Then also, you know, making sure that we show planning officers the output of their hard work, and it's probably a question about whether we do that enough. You know, here's what you've helped to build, but you might not have been physically doing the building, but you've played an important role in that process, so they can understand that when we're approving things that might be a bit different, a bit out there, a bit more tricky, and that, you know, they can see what the reward of that is as much as anyone else can. So those would be a few of my reflections.
So North Somerset currently isn't part of the West of England Combined Authority. We'd like to be, but that's not currently the situation. So I guess our influence is sometimes we come to the table, but we don't have as much influence in the same way. So, but I welcome the fact that Tom is already doing that and championing that in that housing board. You're right, North Somerset, in working up a local plan, this is the time to push and champion. And so I know that we're at the stage where it's going to be the next 18 months, so there are definitely different phases. The first phase that we're doing at the moment, which is going to come out after Christmas, is kind of the locations. And then what I understand a local plan has, is then it has a number of policies, which is almost like the fine print. So how much affordable, how much renewables, and that's where I hope that we might have a section about how to enable community-led housing and support community-led housing. And I think that, from what I recollect, like I think that Bristol had some of their policies reviewed, and Keith contributed to something a couple of years ago. So it would be great, basically, to pinch and adopt. It's quite new to North Somerset to be encouraging that. There's quite a lot of change has happened in the past 2 years since. So I got elected as a Green Party councillor, and I make up a rainbow administration. So we're currently run as an organisation by Independents, Lib Dems, Labour and Green all working collectively together. It's quite refreshing, it's quite new, but it means that it is a change, and we're working with our different departments to introduce how to deliver our ambitions, which includes community at the heart of it. We've made a commitment of open, fairer, greener, and we therefore want to, that kind of open, fairer, greener is about how do you empower community to be on their own journey, how do you adapt and respond, and how do you respond to the climate emergency. So I hope that we can be creating a framework that is supportive of community-led housing.
Thank you so much. Do you want to hold on to that? Any other questions? Paul?
Yeah, so my question is, and I'll direct that to Sally, Steve and Tom. So outside this room, a lot of people will say we've got this existential housing crisis, 12,000 plus on the home choice waiting list on community-led housing, when we should be moving full steam ahead to deliver affordable housing? And if you only had 3 sentences to counter that, what would those 3 sentences be?
Please do pass the microphone down.
Yes, I would say community-led housing is one of the solutions. All the other solutions are still there, but they haven't delivered. I was actually a bit shocked when Tom said 16,000, because I've been saying 12,000 for a very long time, and I didn't realise it had gone up to 16,000. However, there are large housing associations, there is the local authority and many other people in the west of England who are building big numbers. So they are making every effort to try and reduce that number. But community-led housing is bringing new, different people, and it's saying, it's not asking somebody else to fix it for you, it's saying, what can we do, and can we be empowered to do it for ourselves? And on that journey we will bring, as Sheldon Road has, people off the housing register, so about half of the people at Sheldon Road are straight off the housing register. So that means that they are fairly high banded and they are in severe housing need, because you've got to be in severe housing need to get to the top of that 16,000. So it's not the answer, but it is one of the answers. And actually, if we facilitate and empower everybody to play their part, then it's not just saying government, it's your job, housing associations, it's your job. It's saying what in the community can we do, and people feel great about it. I mean, hopefully Keith, when you talk to him and moved in, he will say he felt incredibly happy. It's tough at the moment, but you know, we are nearly there, and therefore it's an intentional community, which I think is very different to building houses and literally what we normally do is totally go off the housing register. We do have a workshop with them, and then they move straight in, and then they get to know everybody. So that answers the question.
It's more than 3 sentences.
Too many sentences. Too many sentences.
But the first bit was I explained that in 3 sentences.
There just weren't any full stops in there.
You make me go laugh, so I want to say
What Sally said, it's not either or, and through community-led housing, what you're doing is you are levering in all this additional resource into housing that isn't there at the moment. So you're bringing land to use which no one else is interested in. I'm just going to caveat that by saying that doesn't have to be the case. This could be the way that we deliver all housing. So you're bringing in land, you're bringing in energy, skills, passion, and you're bringing in backing from other quarters, grant-making trusts, foundations, government funding, which is designed only for that way of doing things. So it's complementary.
Question now, I've already have to work out 3 sentences. People in the greatest housing need are also those in the greatest need of power, control, agency. First reason. They may often use that power to get more affordable housing built than would otherwise be the case. Which we see in many parts of the country, campaigns to increase the proportion of affordable housing through things like Acorn. You know, that is power translates into an increase in the amount of social housing being provided. And we can use that power and control and agency to do more than just bricks and mortar. And the housing association sector and the council and communities in Bristol and the rest of them have a long experience of that additional benefit, that greater contribution to improving the quality of life that comes about through seeing things in those terms rather than just how many social rented units can we knock up in a fixed amount of time.
I was just going to chip in. I think it's related. I think that there's another interesting angle, which is about how we use our existing housing and property and the skills that we can create and the job creation we can create in retrofit, but also in adapting the buildings that we have. We know that our commercial space won't potentially be used in the same way as it has historically. But what we want is quality homes out of that, not poor quality homes. So I think there's an interesting dynamic around job creation, good quality job creation, and the retrofit, and rethinking about some of our very large 4 or 5 beds in our community.
Thank Thank you so much. Great question. Any other questions? Yes, at the back with the white jumper on. Yeah,
Anna Hope from Promotive. This one might be directed mainly at the councillors, but I mean anyone feel free to pitch in. I think in our region we've got quite a few really good examples of community-led self-build self-finish schemes, not least Sheldon Road. And I just wondered, because now there's an increasing kind of push, not only on community-led housing but also on self-build, custom build from the government, what synergies do you see that would help boost delivery of both self-build, self-finish, custom build and community-led housing at the same time in our area?
I feel like we have quite different landscapes. I grew up in central Bristol, so I know how tight the land feels, whereas of course I now live in North Somerset, which feels like countryside, and it is countryside, but you look around and you've got the fields and things. So I think that your question was how do we leverage and get more support for self-build, and I think...
Can I just clarify that? I think it's really that there is lots of pushing for self-build, and if councils can deliver community-led housing through a self-build or self-finish model, it might help tick boxes or maybe access some extra resources that would help boost community-led, I suppose. That's the end.
I think it probably comes back to that local plan and policy shaping. At the moment, North Somerset doesn't build its own homes and it doesn't own houses either, whereas Bristol does. It's quite interesting, you kind of go into different organisations and people assume like a council owns council houses. North Somerset doesn't own any, so they don't naturally build any. So I guess we're not builders of houses, but we do commission schemes to build houses. So I think I don't know what the trigger is to making that happen at this time. I think it's still about policy shaping and priorities. But what I was going to say was that actually that if these houses can be built with climate emergency in mind, so thinking about a lower carbon footprint, then again it's showing others how it can be done in meeting, of course, my agenda, which is the climate emergency agenda. But I think that's good for everybody. I think that's good, yeah, for everybody to show that you can live that way, that you can build these houses, and then we can turn around to the pressure I've got from Taylor Wimpey, Bloor Homes and Persimmon, who want to build all the houses in North Somerset. You know, I don't think that'll meet anybody's needs, really. I do think it meets the needs, but it won't meet the carbon journey.
Yeah, so I think the key thing for me, so probably just worth me saying about what we're doing at the moment around all that kind of planning, and not so much the plan department, but we're in the process of writing a 30-year business plan for our council housing stock, but also as part of that, we're also updating our housing investment plan, which is about the maintenance, repairs, retrofit, all that piece, and we're also doing a housing delivery plan, and all that will go to Cabinet in January next year to inform what we're going to be doing for the next few years as we try to take things forward. And so I will check with the team about whether community housing sits there in that plan or separately. But what we want to do is bring things together so that we can drive forward as much community housing as possible. I think some of that is about obviously further land disposal of sites. What grants can we access or help yourselves to access as well? Because sometimes actually it might be writing a supporting letter saying, no, we're really hugely back in this scheme. Homes England have obviously got huge sums of funding knocking around. What can we tap into there? So those are the things we'll always be on the lookout for, those opportunities. And if yourselves involved in schemes are aware of those opportunities, come to us and come have a conversation with us. So we're doing a lot of the planning this year, what the next few years are going to look like, because the other thing is, given these targets that were part of the Labour manifesto about 1,000 affordable by 2024, 2,000 total, how are we going to accelerate housing and continuing the same old way with private developers is not how we're going to get there. It's going to be through modern methods of construction, community-led housing, and really kind of giving more power over to different ways of doing things that also address the climate emergency in the process. Because the thing we need to be mindful of as well is the climate emergency and addressing that needs to be closely linked with social justice. We can't leave those that might be sort of the more poorest, most vulnerable in society behind as we go on that climate, addressing the climate emergency. I think we need to keep that, and community-led housing is a really good opportunity to link those two things together and address things.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Can I just
Yes.
add one quick,
Yes,
just a
go
quick
on.
thought experiment. So, I mean, there is lots of interesting stuff being built in Bristol. There's also loads of flats being built by commercial developers. The evidence around the benefits it brings What if you did a build-to-rent flat, but the tenants were able to come and finish off their homes, and the tenants manage the homes for themselves as a cooperative? So the developer gets their money building the shell, the investors get their return because they're getting lower voids, actually fewer empty homes demonstrably and cooperatively owned units than elsewhere. Everybody's happy, and the tenants get more power and get all these additional benefits. Why wouldn't you write planning policy in a way that basically favours that and really leans into it? And I think on the policy point, there's a really interesting observation in the Bacon Review, which is the number of times councils will, in their planning policy elsewhere, basically say, we like this is good, we're supportive of it, which is completely meaningless. Because it doesn't change a thing. And what you need to be doing is putting in policies with teeth. And I think Bristol, with its land disposal policy, has an example of this. It's probably the best land disposal policy in the country. There you go, take that Liverpool. But we need more of that kind of real policy to really drive change. And you know, why wouldn't you want to see all city centre development in Bristol or Bath look like Sheldon Road in terms of that kind of tenant participation process?
Good question. We're going to leave that one hanging. Last question to the lady in the back in the green jumper.
Thank you. Maddie from here on Tiny House Community Bristol. So we're a community benefit society and our interest is across the west of England. We're a beneficiary of the council's amazing land disposal policy and we're totally committed to helping that kind of in an action learning type of way. And hopefully we're already doing that by, you know, feeding back how it's from our perspective as well. And so we're obviously we want to proliferate what we're doing across the west of England, and that means finding sites. So in terms of the other local authorities outside Bristol, Bristol also has a pretty good open data set about the assets that it owns as well. So I'm just thinking about how do we go about accessing land affordably in the same way that we have through the land disposal policy in Bristol in the other local authorities. Obviously, Bridget, you can't necessarily speak for South Gloss or whatever, but I'm just wondering how you're thinking of moving that forward, you know, if Bristol's policy is an inspiration or if there's other ways that we can approach you to find new sites that are affordable to us in the same way.
Good question. Can I get the mic down this way? We're running out about 2 minutes left.
Well, that's all right, because I pretty much don't know the answer, because I'm not the housing lead and I don't know the day, you know. It's a great role being a councillor, but I don't know the answers to all of the questions, I'm afraid to say. So I could take it away, and I think we should work out who the right person to speak to in the council is to find that information. I think that would be good. So yeah, very interested in it. Just don't know who. I do know who we could go to ask, but I just don't know the details of that at the moment.
And can we present to North Somerset, please?
We can find out who the best people to speak to do that is. Yeah, I think there's no point in speaking to kind of me who already is on board. It's about bringing other people into that conversation, really, because that's when you get, you know, more interesting results.
I am going to pause the questioning there. Thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for our panellists? Okay, we're going to take a short break. Feel free to grab a drink, use the facilities, and then we will start back again at 2:30. See you then. Just want to welcome you all back. Thank you so much. Hopefully you've got everything you need on the break. Do find the toilets just through there if you arrive late. There's teas and coffees and things at the back. All right, so we are now coming into our second panel, and in a moment I'm going to invite to the stage the various different people from the panel. But this panel is, let's make sure we've got the right slide. Here we go. This panel is what are the opportunities in community-led housing and what can we learn? We're going to start this panel with two guests that are zooming in. So we are hoping, and fingers crossed, that all the technology works and we will have to do some quick troubleshooting if not. And then I'm going to invite to the stage our panels, and we're going to explore this afternoon in this particular panel the opportunities that community-led housing presents and how that fits into the wider narrative of those housing challenges we've already talked about. So can I invite to this stage, please may I invite Liz Ziegler from the Centre of Thriving Places, Melissa Mee from Norwest Media Centre, Maddie Longhurst and Rachel Butler from the Tiny House Movement Bristol, Sam Goss from Barefoot Architects, Chris Chalkley from the People's Republic of Stokes Croft, and on our Zoom we have Claude Hendrickson of Leeds Community Homes and Angelique Retief from the Black South West Network. Can we give them a round of applause to welcome them up? Okay, now here's the moment. All right, now we should have Claude, and we should be able to hear him present. So we're going to hand over to each panellist in turn for 3 to 4 minutes and go from there.
You know, let's back it. I think people have said it's not the only answer. Of course it isn't. There are lots and lots of different answers, but if it's a great one, why not on earth aren't we doing more of it? I think for me, one of the things that's been really interesting in the last few months is seeing that ripple effect in action. And sadly, in many cases, we've seen that ripple effect in action in a lose-lose way, not a win-win way, through the COVID crisis. We've just done a really big piece of research called the COVID Wired, and you can see that online as well, but it's about looking at the wellbeing inequality impacts of the COVID pandemic. And housing came up as a really, really key issue in there, and it's because housing has these extraordinarily different crossover issues. So for people who were already vulnerable, their housing vulnerability created all of these kind of ripple effects. So they had, extra financial pressures. They were, delays to housing maintenance. They lost their social connection. They became more and more isolated. You've got overcrowding in houses. You've got, a lack of access to green space. All of these things were things that were impact multiplied for those already vulnerable in society. Those who don't have access to good, affordable, all those things that should be a right in our space. So being able to turn around those lose-lose situations that we've seen so powerfully through COVID by giving people the power, the access, the skills, the jobs, all of those things that community-led housing can do, you start really hitting some of those appalling inequalities that we've seen magnified. I was always also asked to mention, sorry, I'm speaking way too fast, but anyway, I'm cracking through here. Why bother measuring? Does measuring really matter? Isn't that just a kind of technicality that we worry about later on? This is about people and their lives and the planet. On one level, I really agree. Of course, it is about people and our lives and our planet. But actually, there's the classic thing of if you measure the wrong things, you strive for the wrong things. And that's really true at a societal level. At the moment, we're measuring all the wrong things. We're prioritising the measurement of wealth building for the few, not life building for the many. So really good measures and sets of measures, we've had them mentioned already, create a really clear goal, a direction of travel, whether that's for policymakers, for individuals, for communities. Having us have a collective sense of where are we going and why are we going there is incredibly important. It should be supporting those local plans people have been talking about. It should be supporting, our growth strategy. Well, the growth strategy for what? A local plan for what? It's for the well-being of people and planet. And if it isn't, then it's the wrong plan and rip it up and start again. Sorry. Understanding, measurement's really important for understanding what's happening, the strengths and opportunities in a community, but also the needs of a community. So really understanding, getting underneath the skin of that system, understanding what's working, what's not working, really helps us to intervene in the right places and in the right ways. It also really helps to focus action into those spaces where it matters most, for the outcomes that matter most for communities, but also for the places where there's the most need. And it helps gather resources. Demonstrating that impact can really help bring in funding. It can bring in, far more people into the community-led housing space. Can get support from local authorities and national government, etc., etc. So there's lots and lots of good reasons to measure. I'm not normally one who does an advert space in this, but I was asked to mention the fact that there are loads of practical ways. Lots of community-led housing is starting to use measures like the Thriving Places Index to see what are those ripple effects, what are those things. You don't have to start from scratch with a blank piece of paper going, oh God, how do we work out what we're influencing here? There are things in place. We do some of that stuff, but there are other people who do as well. And also we've been working locally with the brilliant Z-Pods development and also with Community Land Trust themselves on supporting them to measure the direct impact on individual lives. Melissa talked about this earlier, actually the well-being of those people in those houses, what difference are you making? So we're working with those projects, other people have got other approaches, but don't feel like this is too big a thing to measure. There's lots of support out there, and grab hold of it and start measuring what matters and demonstrating to the rest of the world that this is not some sideline, this is how we should be doing well-being, housing in the future. Thank you.
Do you want me to come up there? Yeah. We're sharing it. Yeah, come and red. Right. It's a bit formal. Here we are, Tiny House Community Bristol. Let's go straight into our first slide. This is one of our monthly general circle meetings in Stapleton, and we get together every month and we pull together all the work that each of our circles have been doing in our sociocratic structure. Our vision is a world where people can dwell and thrive in diverse, inclusive and nourishing communities, integrated into and participating in balance with the wider living systems of the planet. I completely forgot to introduce myself. I'm Rachel Butler. I'm the founder of Tiny House Community Bristol and one of the directors. Maddie's one of the directors too. And we are using systems thinking approach to look at the converging crises that we find ourselves in and that are bearing down on us. And we're putting these systems thinking solutions into practice on the ground. I just wanted to bring to people's attention this chart here, which I don't think has been shared very much. This is the Integrated Earth Systems Science Framework by the Resilience Centre. Each of these segments of the pie chart is one of our planetary boundaries. And just overshooting one of these segments means collapse, quite simply. We're currently overshooting 6 of these boundaries. It's not just about climate change, it's not just about biodiversity loss, it's about freshwater use, it's about land system change, it's about biochemical flows and ocean acidification. So our very urgent work is to bring these overshoots back into a place that is safe for humanity. And looking at our social systems, everybody knows the crisis that we have with homelessness, loneliness, the broken housing market, and the absolute scandal that people have to use food banks. In 2021, in one of the wealthiest nations on the planet. So we took part in the first round of the land disposals for the council, and we gained preferred bidder status on this site here, which is Insley Mills. Okay. And so we are using that systems approach to look at all these overshoots, and at the same time we are building community. I'd just like to invite Maddie to say maybe a little bit about how we're creating community. Is that 1 minute for us both? Okay. Gosh, I don't know what to say. I also wanted to bring the fact that we are volunteers, and we've been putting in huge amounts of time for, Rachel for many, many years, me for about 2.5 years, and all of the people involved in Tiny House Community Bristol are doing it voluntarily, and which is why we have spent so much love and attention around the governance structure that we use and the way that we use sociocracy, and because it ensures that every voice is heard and that every moment of time that people put in out of love, they get something out of, and that's the only way that we're able to sustain it. So I'm kind of bringing the dimension from the community that there's that as soon as we put the ourselves on the radar, it's like there's an instant enormous community of people out there who are like, yes, we're with you, we want this, we want to do it, and that is a vast resource that needs to be empowered. It won't be sustained if it's done on a voluntary basis. There's a massive powerhouse there in the people, and they want to come together, and they're ready, and the way that, and holding it in a kind of equitable way, using tools of, we use sociocracy as our dynamic governance for and everything, has made what we've done possible at the centre of what we're doing. As Rachel sometimes likes to say, the houses are incidental. What we're doing is we're building community power. And so we've kind of navigated our way together as non-experts, learning as we've gone along, and with the help of many people here, to get us on this journey, which is going to be hugely exciting and part of what transforms the way we do housing in the city and beyond. So thank you everyone in this room for all the support you've given us so far.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon everybody. My name's Sam Goss and I am next. There we go. I'm from Bale Architects in Bristol. I've been asked to talk about community-led housing at scale. So our slides have gone a slightly different colour, that's interesting. Our vision is to empower and enable everyone to design and build their own sustainable, affordable home. And I'm going to demonstrate why this approach works, prove the values that it creates, create a model or models that can be able to be scaled. I'm going to discuss the key areas we see for the vision of community-led housing, an issue of who is involved in developments, how land distribution needs transforming, how planning can be utilised as an enabling tool, and funding can be achieved to deliver scale in the community-led sector. I think it's the most important space in the housing sector at the moment to make radical changes necessary and deliver the future homes that are affordable, sustainable and welcomed by communities, positive for both places and planet, and we need to develop replicable models that can scale. I think it's important not to forget the why. To scale, we need to remind ourselves, and everyone else, and everybody else has said this already as well, so I can whistle through this, but it's so critically important to provide sustainable, affordable homes for society. The social values and potential impact of creating this, in my view, is greater than any other change in society in our drive towards social, environmental and economic justice. If more than 30% of people's families' income isn't spent servicing rent or mortgage, it can emancipate people's time and money to be spent doing important, valuable work such as childcare, family support and spending money in the real economy. Communities are the best placed people to guide developments that they want to see and delivered at scale. If we want to develop and deliver better outcomes for housing projects at scale, then asking communities to guide, inform, shape and develop them is absolutely key and the only starting point for positive development. The current mechanisms of this should be embraced and harnessed at scale and include creating neighbourhood development plans, community-led design briefs, neighbourhood planning forums and other active community groups which seek positive engagement with all stakeholders and who themselves are willing to listen and learn. We believe that communities are the experts of their areas and we treat them like consultants. They know what will work, what they want and what is needed, and everybody should listen to them. Deep engagement with communities is key to delivering a process which is truly consultative. Using neighbourhood planning forums collaboratively with all parties is crucial to creating close links between all stakeholders, councils, councillors, developers, community groups, and they must all be actively brought together in the same space at the earliest possible moment to inform projects. And similarly, the planning system must be harnessed positively to engage with local planning authorities at a pre-app stage and understand the benefits and explain the merits of community-led housing approaches. land and ownership, cost and distribution is one of the major barriers, and I think it's a real opportunity for change that community-led housing can help to deliver. Finding land is such a major barrier, and community-led housing can be used to significantly de-risk projects financially, and the myriad benefits and added values need to be objectively presented to landowners. Things like pre-sales, pre-lets and long-term interests should all be explored. A long-term approach to value needs to be taken, and whilst community land trusts offer one great model for this, there may be others too. Some of our clients, for example, have sought to get very long leases from people like Rotary. We think that once trust in the sector is really established, partnering with mission-aligned organisations and landowners offers massive potential. And we're beginning to see this across projects with legacy landowners, local authorities, the Church of England, Rotary groups, as well as bigger developers starting to offer parcels of land on larger sites to community-led housing groups, co-housers and self-finishers. We think that the self-build market also has a significant appetite, and local authorities need to embrace this, providing the infrastructure and support to enable this type of project to deliver new towns at scale, significant new developments alongside codes. Community-led housing creates a smoother, more effective planning journey if trust and mutual understanding are established early on, and it shouldn't be seen as a great enemy, rather a tool for developing the future places that we all want to be a part of. Community housing is part of changing this story and mindset and the planning process more widely. We embrace planning and believe that community housing can teach the system a huge amount in order to achieve better outcomes at scale. Our experience has invariably demonstrated that the planning system simply can't cope with projects that don't have any objections and indeed are actively supported. And this is a direct result of better process, depth of involvement and better design outcomes. We've talked about social value, I'll nip onto that. Community-led housing groups can't scale alone yet, since they have no assets against which they can borrow and leverage finance all too often. The existing financial models of most affordable projects we're working on rely upon financial partnerships with housing associations, for example. And they also bring along essential expertise. The rural and urban models for this have both demonstrated to work well. Mutual ownership does not seem to be a silver bullet, unfortunately, but is an amazing model. And we think that the future of finance is changing really quite quickly, and we will respond to that through these projects. Thank you.
Jesse's just bringing up a picture from the interweb net of 1725 Jamaica Street, which is currently the People's Republic of Central HQ. I'm going to talk a little bit about general ideas around land today. What I was asked to talk about is what's going on in the Croft.
I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry.
That sounds a lot more interesting than anything I'm going to say. All right, so are you all kind of generally local? Pretty much. So I don't need to go too much into explaining what Bristol. So I'm the person who's founded this quasi-mythical organisation called the People's Republic of Stokes Croft. Over the last 12 years, we've had quite a rumbustious history, and I like to think of it in a way as a philosophical discussion taking place in real time in an area that is really a cultural node. It's a very special area in its proximity to schools, the cultural mix that's taken place there, the fact that it had 40% dereliction for many, many, many years, and over the last 12, 15 years, the growth in cultural value that has taken place through the artists that occupied all those squatted buildings has basically been all taken up through the process of gentrification by those who own the land. So I'm really taken by the thing that I think it was Tom Chance who said, he says, if you don't own the land, you don't hold the power. And that's a fundamental element of our thinking. And if we look at just the last 12 years, in 2011 we had the Tesco riots. The majority of the community did not want that to happen, but corporate power dominated. Then talk about the carriage works. The carriage works had actually 40 people living in vans behind the carriage works. They were all cleared out, and we now find ourselves with a very corporate development in a building that in many ways was a cultural powerhouse in terms of its ability to produce the street art, because everybody used to break in and paint the street, practice their graffiti in that building. The Bear Pit, there's a similar thing. That was, in our view, the aspiration was to create a commons in that space, and when it came to the death, we were pushed out by the police didn't even know. It was local government that did that, and unbeknown to us, it became part of the Broadmead Business Improvement District, so corporately run. So that is why the Bear Pit's full of hanging baskets now, and anti-graffiti paint, because it's safe. So where we're getting to is we need a real complete rethink around land, and the battles in Stoke have all really been around who gets the right to do what, and that's all around land, and the whole idea of land and land ownership, and therefore you've got the right to do whatever you want with it, is an invention. So what our response to it is actually the People's Republic of Social. This is the property that, this corner property here, 4 angel investors bought this in September 2013 with a view to agreeing to hand it back to community at the same price they bought it. And we are just about to launch a community share offer in at the end of November, so that this building can be owned in perpetuity. And no, those words in perpetuity are really, really, really important, and Melissa said that, and the last speaker too, Maddie, was really talking about that big time. And you know, what we're really aiming to do is, it's really a philosophical debate. It's really about how we work out a response to neoliberalism, if you like. It's as fundamental as that. And so what this represents is an attempt to do that within the water that we swim. So the land trust is going to be a vehicle for owning the land that PRC currently run, that currently occupies this building. So all of the actions that PRC does can happen. So we're running schools of activism. The idea is to create an art factory, which we already have Social China. Some of you will have our mugs in your cupboards, so that it generates sufficient income that PRC can pay sufficient rent to the land trust, so that we can give sufficient. Oh, I'm banging on too much. Okay, so I got the dreaded sign of death there. So land trust, that's what we're going to do. These also relate to land issues around the whole of the country. So we're going to be doing stuff with Nick Hayes. This is going to be the symbol of the land trust. It's little known, but only 8% of the land are we allowed to walk on. The rest is owned by others. And so this is the symbol of it, and there's a beautiful quote here: any friend of mine walks where he likes in this country, or I'll want to know the reason why. Mr. Badger, whack wind in the willow. You know, this idea that this land has been stolen from us. This has been stolen from us. It's concentrated in the hands of a few, and until we address that, it's not going to change. And the kicker is that if we do it through that community-led housing, that is actually the route to make it happen. And we can create exemplars that can work in the financial situation. We can address intergenerational inequity, and everything through a combination of philanthropy and just business lives. That's it. Oh, and in our thing, we're going to be doing, there's going to be 6 months there, so if any of you are interested in holding talks or anything during our share issue, then please contact Keith Cowling, the former chair of Bristol Community Land Trust, and let's hold some events that discuss these major issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we should have our Zoomers, and we should now be able to hear them. Fingers crossed.
Wow. Okay.
Yay.
All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
If you can hear me, give me a wave. Somebody give me a wave to say that you can hear me. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Bristol. Very sorry I couldn't be here in Bristol today. I've been looking forward to this event for so long. So I want to thank Susan and Jesse for the invitation. Okay, quickly, because I don't want anything to go wrong with the technology. My name's Claude Hendrickson. I'm based in Leeds. Quick a bit info about me. I initiated in 88, between 1988 and 84, a self-build project in Leeds, which was inspired, by the way, by a project that happened in Bristol. The Zanzili project in Bristol, where a group of 12 young people in Bristol built a block of flats. Well, we were inspired by that in Chapeltown, Leeds, and we went off to do a self-build project with a group of unemployed black men from Chapeltown. We laid 92,000 bricks, 52,000 blocks, and 7,000 roof tiles, built 12 semi-detached houses, 2-bedroom houses that 20 odd years later, most of the self-builders still live in them. I then went on to be a founder with a lady from Bristol called Stella Clark. We founded the Community Self-Build Agency, which in recent times has done a number of self-builds in Bristol with ex-veterans, homeless men that had fallen off of it on bad times, and we've done it between 2010 and 2015. We did a number of projects in Bristol, so I have a massive affinity for Bristol. It actually changed my life, so I'm so honoured to be part of this event today. Quickly going on. I then went on to be employed by Leeds City Council to do a 10-year strategy into self-build in Leeds. That was in 2015, where I wrote a strategy for self-build in Leeds, where that would be, for example, Leeds has to build 50,000 houses over the next 10 years. So within our strategy, we were saying that 30 houses a year over the next 10 years could be self-built. And so that would leave the other 49,700 houses to be done the traditional way by housing associations, local authority, and 30 a year, which would be 300 over the next 10 years. I handed that strategy in 2015. Not much has been done with it, but at least the strategy has been written. In 2020, I became the first black male community-led housing advisor in the UK. So as part of a national number of about 300 advisors that are national around the country, I became the first black male accredited advisor. 2020, I am doing a piece of research alongside a man called Henry Baptiste, and we've been funded to look into why there are no Bale-led projects in the UK. And I ask this question because many projects, there's been projects in Birmingham over the last 20 years, in London, in different parts of the country, like projects for black people. But an example, there are something like 26, 27 community land trust hubs across the UK, and not one of them is led by a person of colour. So I am very much involved in that. I also just recently was happy to be involved in the the Richard Bacon report into community-led housing as in self-build, which we got recommendation 3 that was in that research 1 minute ago. That was in that research was to support the community housing funds so that we could get more projects up and running. I'm very much into promoting equality, diversity within the community-led housing sector, and I believe that every housing project should have an an EDI policy, equality, diversity and inclusion policy. So if you're planning to set up a group, please make sure you have an equality, diversity and inclusion project policy. I'm trying to fit it in because I'm getting a wave on thing. I'm now working with groups in Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds and Kent, supporting them about getting more black and ethnic minority people into projects. Thank you very much. Sorry I couldn't be there. I'm really so sorry.
Hi, hopefully you can all hear me and see me okay. So I work in research and policy at Black South West Network, which is a racial justice organisation here in Bristol. I do that alongside my PhD at the University of Bristol, which is looking to sort of understand the role of social enterprise in the provision of housing in townships in Cape Town. So as part of my role at BSWN, we did some research around community-led housing. So what I've been asked to do here today is to talk about the opportunities for the community-led housing for Black, Asian, minoritized communities when tackling gentrification and doing that, reflecting on the report that we did. So first, briefly, I'll just run through some key points from the research. So it was sort of jointly funded by Power to Change and Bristol City Council. We aim to capture the picture of the housing needs and aspirations of the different communities in Bristol. The overall objective being to sort of provide evidence for the drafting of recommendations with solutions, particularly looking at community-led housing initiatives. So we sort of surveyed around, over 200 people, 14 interviews, around 3 focus groups, etc. And what came out of the research is that in terms of aspirations, was people wanted ownership, voice and influence, security and affordability. And so, particularly when it came to looking at the opportunities for community-led housing, what came out of it was people saw it as something that could potentially enable the designing with rather than designing for. Which sort of linked to this idea of, the voice and choice kind of aspirations for participants. That home ownership was obviously central for if not all participants, and that idea of ownership obviously came through when talking about community-led housing. Affordability was discussed as one of the main barriers to housing. And when we talked about community-led housing as well, people mentioned, this idea of housing as a service, not as a product. Sorry, I've just had a note to say to turn off live stream, but I don't have the live stream on, so I'm not sure. Anyway, I'll carry on. So housing as a service, not as a product. So traditionally, housing projects sort of focus solely on the building of a house and not the building of the actual participants that are involved in it. But I suppose community-led housing with the people who are going to be living there. So what are the opportunities for community-led housing when we're tackling gentrification? So I suppose, international research and local evidence suggests that participation in community-led development builds residents' democratic capabilities, such as reclaiming space for their own use, taking control of development in their neighbourhoods, being able to engage with democratic state processes and local government on a more equal basis. So, combined with potential affordability gains, this is, I suppose, one of the key appeals of community-led housing for, low-income urban areas where people have experienced successive waves of, regeneration, which have repeatedly failed to offer any kind of substantive participation and influence for residents. So I think, investment in capacity building support is needed in support of residents in low-income areas being able to engage in such initiatives on a level playing field. This is especially important given that many community-led initiatives rely on alliances with local authorities or housing associations and even the private sector for their development, which can result in the original aims being diluted. So I suppose in relation to the research, the needs are there's nothing sort of BME specific, Black or Asian minoritized specific, but agency and access to resources means that the issues have a disproportionate impact on these groups, particularly with regards to the impacts of gentrification. Community-led housing isn't, of course, a panacea, and it requires a multi-scalar, multi-sectoral response, and it may not be a replacement for large-scale private development, but I suppose increasing awareness of the scope of these alternative delivery mechanisms may be an effective way of challenging the status quo by creating additional choice, improving aspirations, and just empowering communities. And I suppose professionals often love to make choices for people, particularly the poor, but poverty changes affordability, not aspiration. So I'll leave it there because I'm pretty sure I've been told to wrap up. So, but please feel free to ask any questions.
Can I invite the panellists that are in the room back to the front? And can we give everybody a massive round of applause? Now, thank you so much for your patience bearing with the Zoom technology drama. We've got 5 minutes for questions. This is going to be short and sweet, I'm afraid. And I know some of the panellists are able to stick around a little bit if you want to nab them, but I also know some of them have to rush off. So if you do have a question, you're going to have to get in there quickly before they leave. But has anybody got a question straight up? Yes. Can you stand and project nicely?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
In terms of something I thought about for years was what I call cloud housing, building above existing uses, especially.
Yeah, you might want to.
Yeah, actually use above car parks, especially in places like Weston.
All right, yeah.
So I just carry on.
Hang on. Do you want to just meet us?
Carry on, sorry about that.
Yeah, so yeah, we have, in terms of city centre areas, we have often very large car parks owned by, especially by supermarkets, and there's a potential above those to actually use that airspace for our type of housing choices. is that being investigated by anyone? You know, if you look in here, Asda down the road have got a big site, and there's a lot of airspace above that in Weston. You've got Tesco's right in the city centre, and to me, approaching those landowners, whether they're Tesco's own or Morrison's historically have owned most of their sites, but it just seems to be somewhere that there's a potential for a win-win both with the owners of the sites and potentially ourselves.
Well, there's a quick. I'm one of the ones that's going to rush off. There's a quick answer, and there's yes. And there is a project of that nature in Bristol next to St George's Park, which is being done through the Z-Pods, and I believe in association with Price Places. No, not with Price Places. the council have done that. So it's a small scale, and yeah, I think it's an interesting idea.
Wonderful. I can probably fit in one more question. Yes, Lindy.
Oh, go on, yeah. Actually, it's for anyone. I think what's really touching is that everybody in the panel has alluded to or demonstrated that the community knows best. The community are the experts of knowing what the issues and the things that they want to address in their community. If you had one wish each, anyone wants to ask it, that you wanted a policy change, you can only have one, I know you want 10 wishes, one wish, what would be your quick priority policy change that you'd like to see happen, whether that's at local or national government?
So the question was, one wish, what would be your policy change? I think this is a great one to end on, so I'm going to ask every member of the panel to give one wish, very briefly, and we'll just run the mic down the row.
I would wish that in National Planning Policy Framework guidance and indeed all local plans there was a policy which insisted that 10% of all homes delivered had to be community-led.
Yay, good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. I would make it a retrofit first.
Thanks.
That when properties come up for sale anywhere, that the community has the right to buy at market rates. So that what we need to do is engineer a transition from privately owned to the possibility of communal ownership, bringing back the commons basically.
My wish would be that central government would get off a mad economic growth narrative and would adopt an economic model which meets the needs of all within the means of the planet, because growth is driving climate change.
That's a difficult question, Lindy. So many. Something about like reversal of the enclosures would be one.
How do I go last? That's so unfair. Apart from ditto to all of the above, if we're specifically talking about housing, which I think you are alluding to, I'm going to slightly sound like a scratch record here, but I think there's interesting conversation to be had in this room about we're talking about community-led housing as if the only thing that community-led housing is literally from, you know, people building the bricks upwards. And I think all housing, I don't think all value should be social value, I think all housing should be community-led. I think the community should be leading what's needed, you know, how to build great communities via housing, etc., is known by the communities. So it shouldn't, you know, if a community, I think it's part of the reason why it tends to be quite white and middle class and all that kind of stuff, is because not everyone's got the time to necessarily build their own houses or necessarily wants to, and that's a really important part of it, it's only part of it. So I think all housing policy should be led by the wisdom of the community, and some of those communities will want to build them themselves and some will not.
I'm just going to extend that a bit and saying I'd really like to put some young people in charge and for us to support them and be in service to young people. I'd like to put them first.
Wonderful. I'm going to pause us there. Can I have a massive round of applause for our everyone, that is 3:30, so we're going to take another break. Do help yourselves to teas and coffees, and there should now be water at the back, so do get some water for yourself, and we will be back ready for panel 3 at 10 to 4. Thank you so much, everyone. Good, do come and take your seats again. Thank you so much. We're about to go into the third panel, and this panel this last panel here is going to be chaired by Paul Hassan. So I'm not going to say very much more than to welcome Paul. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you. Afternoon, everybody, and this is the penultimate, because there's two bits to this session before we have drinks and nibbles. And some people in the community organisations network that I'm involved with in the locality would call this the dog end session. I guess with community-led housing it might be the roach session. I don't know whether that's been too stereotypical though, basically. But I'd like you to think of it as the hors d'oeuvres before our wine and a chance to mingle later on. So we want energy levels up really at this point. So this event, we're really just going to pull together the key themes around community-led housing and why it's actually important. And each of the three panellists, three live here and then one online, will just talk through some of the challenges they've had, particularly focused on some of the three big challenges faced by community-led housing that you'll all be familiar with, and that's land, community and housing finance. I was going to make a joke about housing finance, but Jessie said there'd be no interest. Right, okay. Right, so I can see my standing routine isn't working. So I'm just going to kind of bring the, I'm going to firstly introduce the first panellist who's live in the stratosphere, and that's Christine Eden from the Marshfield CLT. Christine, would you care to address the audience here at the M Shed in Bristol? She's back.
Hello everyone. My name is Christine Eden and I'm from Marshfield Community Land Trust. And I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about our little land trust, which is doing small things, but we think that many of our experiences will be things that are shared by a number of you. So I'm now going to share my screen and show you some slides which talk to you through the various processes we've gone through in the last few years. Well, I hope I'm going to be able to share my screen with you, if the host would enable me to do so. But I am quite capable of talking about Marshfield Community Land Trust for a very long time. Let's see if I can now... No, I'm still not able to access sharing my screen. So there we go, yeah. So, let me tell you a little bit about Marshfield. It's a very lovely little community, situated on the southern edge of the Cotswolds with area of outstanding natural beauty surrounding us, historic village environment, and as I've shown you, the house prices here are very high, reflecting that and the fact that there's very good access to London, Bath and Bristol. So local people have increasingly become priced out of the housing market. And in 2015, an unpopular development led to a sort of lot of opposition, and the developers retreated, but it left behind the problem of affordable homes for local people. And one of the people involved in that initiative set up a village meeting, chaired by the chair of the parish council, with members from South Gloucestershire Affordable Housing Department, and someone from Wessex Community Assets, who was their affordable housing advisor. At that time, the Bristol hub wasn't going. And we had a CLT till anyone could come, and it was decided to have an affordable housing project as our very first initiative. And we went for a CLT because there are a number of reasons. It was community-led, which was a very powerful factor. And it also was not for profit, which after our sort of running with the developers was important. Assets can be held in perpetuity, there's accountability to members, and it's also about housing and community well-being. And it can also deliver other benefits. So, for example, we've got an energy generation project also underway at the moment. Well, our first task, obviously, was to find a site. And we chose to look at all sites around. Here is the bypass, and those to the north of that were considered inappropriate. But altogether, we looked at all those little pink, all those pink sites, and we had a range of factors that we used. Some of them were technical, Is the site level? Can we get access? What size is it? Are there utilities running under it? But then there were issues to do with the green belt, the AONB, landscape, and as well we could take on board, because of the community there, local opinion and owner perspective. We got advice from our advisor from South Gloucester and from our own experiences. We documented every site against those criteria, including those that we did not expect to have to, we expected to build on, but because we needed to know, we might have to justify why we went for some build rather than another. So we actually assessed 31 sites, of which in the end, the majority were rural exception sites, because rural exception site policy allows for houses to be prioritised which would not normally get permission to build. That means that there's a lower cost for those sites. Also, the policy requires that the homes will always be affordable and that parish council supports the project. And with those criteria on a rural exception site, we approached 11 landowners, taking heads of the terms, having meetings, discussing options, but we've got no real interest. So rather than go in with an offer of money, we then offered 3 market plots for the landowner. And provisional agreement was reached on a 1.6 acre site. 10 affordable houses for rent, 2 shared ownership, 3 market houses for subsidy, and 3 plots for landowner. You do expect to break into a song at that point, but I'm not going to. By July 2018, we were able to take that site to the village for consultation, and we had overwhelming approval. And the little images of people dancing was actually how we felt, because it had been such a battle to get to that point. We then, of course, had to get on with the detail of financing the project. And right from the beginning, with the advisor we were using from Wessex, we were going with a scheme to involve partnership with a housing association. And we partnered with Brighter Places, which used to be United Communities. And the process is such that they lease the land from the MCLT. They take the financial risk, they secure the grants from Homes England and South Gloucestershire Council, they manage the build and the tenancies. But the freehold remains with MCLT. So we are always able to ensure that that affordable housing for local people remains affordable housing for local people. We also get, not a huge amount, but we get a ground rent once we get going from the Housing Association, which will be a seed corn for future projects. The design of the actual build was done by a team, not just of the group assembled here, us cheerful lot, but also the landowners came to it, so there are 3 of them who chose not to be in the photograph, and our housing advisor who took the photograph. So you can see we were a motley crew, and we sat around, and here we have an image that we were looking at that particular day. And eventually, we finished up with, this is the actual site. It's not actually adjacent to the village, but it's on the outskirts of the village, and it is surrounded by agricultural barns. And our final design was built on that agricultural barn model, as you can see from the image on the right. We then took that particular design again to the village for consultation. And here we are having a consultation event, people having tea and coffee, chatting to one another. Again, Brighter Places was there, the architects came. It was a very enjoyable occasion. And again, we got overwhelming support. So having had that support, we took the planning application to South Gloucestershire at the end of 2019. And then in May, we got conditional approval depending on us completing a Section 106. Section 106s are what secures really the affordable housing in perpetuity, it secures the open spaces, and it is a very significant document. And then finance and grants during that period will be negotiated by Brighter Places. And in May this year, we finally got our Section 106 signed, and our final contractor negotiations are currently underway. In terms of the impact on the community, the 15 development was quite significant. There were petitions and very angry meetings, and what we have done with this project is bring people together to address something that everyone knew was a problem: affordable housing for local people. And that was seen as relevant to the whole village. And in that sense, it's been an important cohesive activity. And it's also been rooted in that desire for self-determination. We've got a strong membership of 170. We have a huge amount of communication. I'm sure it means that some people still say they don't know what's going on, but it has meant that while it's been a lengthy process, we have maintained support and enthusiasm within the village. And as well, it's helped develop a climate where we're ready to consider other projects which are of benefit to the community. So that whole notion of community-led self-determination has been very powerful and very positive. So we've had what we see as key learning points, and the first is the one I've just been referring to, that notion of self-determination. I remember years ago there used to be a wonderful sitcom which went on about power to the people, and that's a little bit how it's felt. I can't stress enough how important good communication is, both with our membership, with the parish council, with the wider village community. We've also tried to be very sensitive to things like conflict of interest and confidentiality. In a small community, you don't want other people knowing that someone's trying to buy your land or someone's offering to buy your land. You need to keep those things absolutely confidential, and I think we've managed to do that. I would also say that we made very early links with South Gloucestershire Council officers, with our South Gloucestershire councillors and our local MP. And I've been very glad we did that because we've needed to go back to those groups and go back and say, can you help us, can you support us? And we found that being with us right from the beginning has been very important. Nobody likes administration, but the fact that CLTs have a legal structure that gives democratic accountability, financial credibility and legitimacy has also been very significant for us. And lastly, because I think the processes involve the legal issues, the heads of terms, the transfer of leases and so on, all that is very complex. And while I'm sure those skills are sometimes within the community, in our case, we have needed the expertise and experience which has come both from our advisor and from our housing association partner. We have benefited hugely from their expertise and experience. So finally, I come back to where we started from in a sense. Severe growing shortage of affordable housing for local people. Many areas turning into enclaves of the affluent. That was happening last year. But the NCLT, we do not see ourselves meeting that particular challenge, but we also see our housing project as part of an issue that affects the whole community. We want to help sustain Warwickshire as a vibrant and economic active community with strong social relationships and a diversity of skills and backgrounds. And I hope we are doing that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christine. I don't think is she able to actually hear our applause, or is it only?
She can watch on the live stream.
She can
I just
watch
think,
live on the screen. Okay, in space no one hears you scream. I think there's an expression for that. I'm going to ask our next two panellists, Lindsay and Julian, to join us at the front. And I guess I should have introduced myself as well. I was doing that properly. I didn't. Can you grab your seat? I work for locality across the southwest. We're focused on getting community organisations to be strong and successful, very involved in community-led housing. Some of our members, Northwest Media Centre, you would have heard from Melissa earlier, South Mead Development Trust, and Lawrence Weston involved in Ashtree Close. I guess I should also, in the spirit of invasion of the body snatchers, I know that there's been a few references to Brighter Places at the start and in our presentation. I'm also a board member of Brighter Places, so I should reveal myself as well as one of those. So fantastic that I can be here to join you all. So first up, I'm going to ask Julian Woodward, who's involved with the Bristol University Housing Co-op, to address the presentation around, just of looking at land, looking at finance and the community that you're looking to address. Julian.
Lovely, all. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Fantastic. Yes, I'm Julian. I'm from Bristol Student Housing Co-op. very much for inviting us to speak today. I think it was CLH West. Thank you very much. It's great to be here, great to get the word out. Looking forward to meeting you all later. So, do I have slides? Do I?
Yes.
Sorry.
Feel free to
Is there? Oh, lovely. Right. Is that one up there?
Yeah.
There's a mic. Just next. Ah, lovely. Right. So, there's a student housing crisis in Bristol. It's really not great. There's too many students. The number's growing each year. There's more and more students, and not necessarily the place to put them. It's a very expensive place to be a student. It averages about $6,500 a year for University of Bristol students' rent, and the average University of Bristol student has an income of around 7-8 grand with maintenance loan and parental support. So it's not working. And in terms of what the actual university provides, only 5% of the halls of residence beds are set at a price below half that of the maximum maintenance loan. So it's expensive. It's expensive in the private sector. It's expensive with the university's own portfolio, which is not fantastic, and it's set to get worse. And yeah, the availability is awful. I'm sure you've all seen the horror stories of people being housed, well, University of Bristol and UE students being put as far as Newport and Bath, and having to commute in and having to lose that student experience. And it's just not conducive to learning. It's not conducive to feeling part of the community. It's just awful. Yeah, so we are a group of students. We started off with the Cut the Rent and 2020 rent strike, where we fought the university for rent rebates over the coronavirus lockdown, which is very successful, and we decided that we needed to do something more sustainable and long-term to help student renters in Bristol. And we've been able to do so with a lot of support from CLH West, who've helped us out with financing and business plans, and that's been fantastic. Cooperatives UK have been very useful. They've given us the sort of legal structure and the constitution to get off the ground, as well as there's a fantastic organisation, Student Co-op Homes, who absorb a lot of the risk for things like this. So we affiliate with them, and they take on a lot of the financial risk on our behalf. So as a small student group, very little capital, that's a fantastic thing to have. And as well as the university itself, we have our own person on the inside. Ruth, our founder, is the university's student living officer. So that's been fantastic to get some leverage with their portfolio and their financial support. It's been really useful. And so why? There's 5 main concepts that we want to tackle for student housing in Bristol. Firstly is democracy. So we believe that the current situation for students living in private tenancy it's not democratic, it's not pleasant, it's not dignified to have to ask someone 40 years old and you living 50 miles away if you can put up a poster in your bedroom, or repaint your wall, or have a hamster. And we don't think that's how people should necessarily live and how they should, enjoy the space that they live in. So we believe that part ownership or shared cooperative ownership is more democratic. People can make decisions about the place that they live in. And affordability, so we're hoping to cap the rent at half of the maximum maintenance loan value. So this is roughly £90 a week, which is essentially unheard of for student tenancies in Bristol. But we're able to do so by not taking a profit from it, and because we have a very generous deal with the university in the works. And accessibility, so we're going to implement a no guarantor policy, because a lot of students, especially from lower income households and from student carer backgrounds and estranged students and international students, find it very hard and very demeaning to have to go through a guarantor policy, where you're at a university in Clifton with a bunch of very well off kids, and you're told by your landlord that your parents have to earn 4 times whatever the rent is to be able to rent there. And we think we can do without that, and we aim to do without that, to not exclude anyone. And quality of housing. So I'm sure you've all heard the horror stories of student landlords that live 60, 70 miles away, they're absentee, they don't necessarily care because they don't have to deal with awful mold problems and leaky ceilings and that kind of thing. And community. So we really care about how students fit in to the local community. We don't think it's currently working because of the private landlord ownership model that sort of underpins student private housing. We've termed this the Redland model. If any of you are aware of the Redland area of Bristol, it's very transient. Students come for 3 years, they're rarely in the same property for more than a year, they don't know their neighbours, they don't care about the community, which is kind of understandable if, you know, you're being charged £500–600 a month in a place that you don't know and you assume that all of your neighbours are students. It's not very conducive to good community. And we believe that cooperative housing is more of an anchor. You're going to live there for a longer period of time. You're going to be an owner of that property, so you're going to care about whether or not the neighbours hate you for having 4 o'clock parties. We think this is so much more conducive to having a better relation between students and the local community, which is not great for the present. And how are we going to do this? So we've had a very generous offer from the University of Bristol. They've got a halls of residence that they're not using anymore, or don't want to use anymore, and they've offered us a very generous rent agreement on that. Where we have a sort of surplus share arrangement, where we do a certain amount of works to it out of pocket, out of the rental income, and then when we paid off those works, so sort of rewiring, retiling, getting a new boiler in, that kind of thing, we can split the rest of the money 50-50, and we hope to plunge that quote-unquote profit into the deposit for a house, possibly to even buy the property, the halls of residence that we'll be staying in. And regardless of whether or not that adds up to enough to buy a house, we'll have 10 years under our belt of hopefully sound financial management, which we hope will put us in a good position for finance in the future, which is something quite hard as a group of basically 19-year-olds with no capital underlying. We need something, and the university has provided us that, and we're very thankful for that. So there's a lot of challenges we found, particularly with the property. It's an old Georgian property, and it's been quite mismanaged by the university over the years, so there's a lot that will have to be done for it to be livable for September, when we hope to move in. And we don't quite know what the cost of surveillance are going to be, we don't know what the upfront costs are going to be. So finance, and finding that finance, is probably issue number one. We won't have rental income until people are actually moved in. So yeah, there's a lot to work forward to that. And sustainability is the other core. Myself and the other core members of the co-op won't be students next year, and we won't even necessarily be living in Bristol next year. So we need the model to be where we don't necessarily want a situation where there's 30 people living in the property and we're arranging things from outside, from London or wherever we've gone after Bristol. We don't want that to happen. We want it to be led by member residents, and there's a big problem in finding the right people. How do we find people who are that we can predict will be involved with it in a year, 5 years' time? It's hard. But a hands-off approach is definitely what we're aiming for. We won't achieve much if we're just essentially being student landlords for not for profit. It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. It's been very good to speak to you all. Look forward to hearing the rest of the speeches. And if you'd like, on the screen, do hit us up, do drop us a message, do come say hi if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian, that's brilliant, and I think it's really refreshing to see that approach from students kind of fighting against the kind of rabbit hutches. I don't know if there's anyone from the Unite Student Housing movement here at the moment, but that right to have proper space to live in and control of your life, and particularly I was hit by the fact that many being forced to live in Newport, or I've grown up in Cardiff, we used to call it Zooport, and we went to the Stowaway Club. I don't know if anyone knew that place, but had to run like hell to get the last train back, so not a great place. So fantastic and inspirational story, thanks for that, Julian. Next up, we have, last but not least, in terms of this panel discussion, we've got Lindy Morgan. Not only she's down as the Corston Community Homes, which is one of the current organisations she's involved, but obviously she's been involved in a number of really important projects over the course of the last few years, not least Southmead Development and some of the work around Corston, but obviously fantastic to tame the beast, so to speak, there. So Lindy, with no more ado, I'm going to invite you to address the theme of land, community and finance in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Great, thanks Paul. I mean, it's just amazing, isn't it? Community-led housing, such a big umbrella with all the different aspects of it that we've had presented to us this afternoon. So yeah, it isn't the thing that will solve the housing crisis, but boy, does it have a whole load of different solutions that will be complementary to what else is going on. And I wanted to actually start with a stat that came out of the Bacon Review. In the 1980s, 2/3 of homes were built by small and medium enterprises, small organisations, whatever they were. Now that's 12%. So I don't want to knock the big developers, but they haven't solved the housing crisis. So you're damn right there's room for community-led housing and what it can do in all of its guises. So Corston then, so it's not dissimilar really to Christine's earlier. It's a rural scheme. We'll be looking to try and get a rural exceptions site agreement. And actually, I want to big up Bath and North East Somerset. Gary Ward was here. I don't know if he's still here. Can't see. And they've been really supportive and really helpful. So this is great that Community-led Homes West are for the West of England region, and they've supported me in my community to bring this get this project off the ground. And also, interestingly, we started this during the pandemic. So we've done our consultation during the pandemic. We've carried out 2 surveys during the pandemic. It's not a huge community. It's only about 200 homes, but I've knocked on every single door and put an envelope through every single door. And it was amazing. It's a bit like Christine's, sort of wealthy. The big landowner there is the Duchy, also owns a lot of the properties. It was first raised that there was a housing issue and a housing need in the area at a parish council AGM by a retired lady who rents from the Duchy and can't afford the rent anymore. And also the home is obviously not suitable for her needs. And that was a couple of years ago. And these things take a little while to get going. And so November of last year was when it kicked off. And to give the Duchy fair credit, they're on board with it. They absolutely support community-led. They've never worked with the people I'm working with have not worked with the CLT before. Bristol Community Land Trust is its articles state that it can be operative across the west of England. The community are working didn't want to set up its own CLT. As Christine said, there's a lot of administration and that has to be maintained and sustained. They didn't want that. They just want the homes. And it was surprising. We've also been setting up a community orchard. And the woman leading on that said, I'm not used to doing community consultation. And we did this session outside the village shop, because obviously we couldn't be indoors. And I said, don't worry, we'll do it together. I said, you haven't got to worry. You want to put some trees in. I said, I want to build some houses. It's that the pitchforks will be aimed at me. Couldn't have been further wrong. People absolutely, overwhelmingly, 70%. We want the houses. We want affordable housing, and not so keen on the trees. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I could knock me over with a feather. But anyway, so she's all right now. We found her another site. In fact, actually, the site is linking to where we think the site will be for the housing, so that we can. It is difficult, as Christine said. It could be on the edge of a village, and actually, how do you ensure that development is part of the community? So actually, we're linking it with the public footpath and the orchard, so that. They've got something fabulous there and it links up the village. Don't know if I'm answering your question really, Paul. It's, because they're all so different, I couldn't have done this without Community-led Homes West. They paid for it. We did a housing needs survey with the support of Baines, not financial support, but certainly a very well-meaning, a really helpful, critical friend on the design of the survey. Rhiannon and I spent hours on SurveyMonkey getting all the questions right, and then to come back, because obviously unless there was a need, then you can't just build for the hell of it, and it showed a need of 15 homes, so that was great. And so we've done the desktop survey now, looking around the village to say what sites are or not available, and we're now down to 1. Comes back to Christine's other point about confidentiality. At some point, so the landowner, the Duchy, is on board with that, but at some point we've got to come clean with the rest of the community, because it does affect some people more than others. Luckily, it's right behind me, so nobody can accuse. Yeah, I want a housing, but I'll have it over there, thank you. So that's helpful in when we approach people. I think what I've found most refreshing is the support for it though, the support within the community. The biggest challenge is funding, undoubtedly. We're lucky that we're working with Bristol Community Land Trust, so we don't have that added layer, if you like, of setup. It's a bit that sort of oven ready. I think maintaining control, the community keeping control is going to be a pressing issue when you're working with the duchy, not because they're not helpful, but you know, it is the duchy. They do like a lot of control, and if anyone's been to Poundbury, you know, that they know how they want it. So, and we won't necessarily want to be different to that, but we will. You've got to compromise, you've got to be pragmatic. The most important thing is that we get some affordable homes built for people who have a local connection. They're either already in the village in unsuitable housing, or they've got family, or they work in the village. And we've got a big care home in the village, and as you can imagine, they struggle to hire. I don't really want to say much more than that. I think we're early on in our journey, and we've just got to persuade Bain's planning department now that this should be treated as a rural exception, and I'm reasonably confident of that. Thank you.
Really interesting contrasts and comparisons in terms of what's going on in Marshfield, but we did have a message through from Christina just to assure you that beautiful forest she was in wasn't levelled for housing, basically. So the tree huggers are still alive and kicking in Marshfield, not so much where Lindy lives, but there we go. So thanks for that, Lindy, and we're going. If you want to think about questions, we just want them to kind of percolate for a while. And then what I want to do is bring up our keynote speaker. So we've got here, I think, Khalid Mayer. Khalid, reveal yourself, sir. And Hayden. Khalid in a housing cooperative that's set up in 1985. And they've currently got 54 houses, I believe, currently, right now. And that's some new builds as well as refurbished housing as well. And only 95% of them, so an amazing story to tell. And you've come live and direct all the way from London to talk to us today. So Khalid, address the audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. Keynote speaker, I wasn't told that before I came. But
we updated you, sir.
I try to do my best. It's been really good to come here and see that there are so many actors coming and being interested in community-led housing. I got here, I think, about 2 o'clock, and you know, I heard some very, very interesting statements. I heard the philosophical discourse to land ownership. I heard about you know, the security of a home is a human right. And you know, I heard about social value and social impact, and it really hit me hard. And even in fact, it hit me hard when I actually arrived in Bristol. I mean, I've been to Gloucester, and I don't think I've ever been to Bristol. And with Black History Month, you know, in terms of kind of like the Edward Colston statue, you know, these are the things ringing in my head, and there's also kind of like Roy Hackett, the bus driver, which you will know, in that community activism. And you know, so there's kind of like so many affinities that I have, and I was thinking about terms that were kind of like relevant in this time. And I thought, you know, in terms of expressing where we were as a black community, and I suppose still are. You know, the term "I can't breathe" is you know, very, how could I say, it's almost like a meaningful term, not in the context of just what happened to George Floyd, but in terms of, you know, how everybody was kind of like restricted, you know, as kind of like victims of society and not being able to kind of like express themselves because of the way society is structured. So what I'm actually going to do now is really kind of hopefully to talk to some of those issues through the lens of our journey, because you know, we've been going for 35 years, and I suppose now, you know, people are now asking me to speak at different venues, and very much talk about, you know, how did you do it, and how did you sustain yourselves? Because, you know, there are many times when we've been in front of different agencies, especially even recently when we've looked to develop new homes. And they've looked at our bank balance, and then they've looked at the colour of our skin, and you know they can't work it out. But to give you where we started from, and I think I met Susan at the Stir to Action Festival, and when I spoke there, I actually talked about our generation being the legacy of the independence movement of all the colonies in the late 50s and the late 60s. And if you think that everybody in our co-op at that time, in our early 20s, in some of us in our teens, we were of that legacy. And towards the beginning of the 80s, we started having, even though there were kind of riots before then, the riots in Brixton, Toxteth, Tottenham, even here, in St Paul's, and here in Bristol, started highlighting almost to society that there was black people living in the UK, because at that time, I mean, this is another point, obviously since last year, where black people are really shocked about the amount of black people there are now on TV. And I hark back to this time because there was only kind of like 1 or 2 black, so we weren't necessarily represented. And if you know how those riots start, I think Steve McQueen has done a series, I've probably seen any of those films, I think that kind of like gives people an insight into the black experience around that time. So yeah, there was the riots in the early 80s, and I don't know if people can see that, but I think a number of people have talked about these kind of various stats that are out there, and I haven't got the stats, but in terms of the disproportionality in terms of pay, health inequality, housing, there's a whole litany of stats that really kind of like show that migrant communities have been, when they come to this country, in a very difficult state. And when I go back to thinking about post-war, we know about the Windrush generation. I remember having read something that says that in government, black people are very much a problem. And I think there's kind of newspaper articles about our Jamaican problem, and then at the end of the 1950s there were the riots in Notting Hill, and really race relations only really kind of like turned the corner in '65 in this country, when they were looking over to America and assuming that they were going to kind of like have some problems here. So in terms of us as a group, obviously the need was there. Now, when we started in 1985, this was a question, what is a housing cost? None of us knew what that was. We were really just young people who were looking to get some affordable housing. And it was really good what, I think it was Julian who just spoke. He really kind of like talked about the actual effective co-op story and the co-op journey in terms of what the need is and how you try to meet it. Now, that's the definition, if you didn't know already. And I would ask the group, okay, well, effectively, what is a black housing co-op? Well, there's no different. It's just that black people are running it. So why is there only, I think there's 2 organisations, there's ourselves as Imani, and there's, I think, Pan-African Refugee Housing Co-op, which are based in London, that are in existence. And I'll let you think about that. Now, these are some of our properties. Great quality. I was in a meeting earlier on this week, and I think it was the National Housing Federation. They were looking at their strategic review in terms of, obviously, over the last 8 months, everybody's having a reset, and now they're looking at how they can serve BME-led organisations better. And they had this kind of scenario planning where it talked about local authorities, or having a scenario where local authorities are investing that much more in social housing, and essentially they're competing with housing associations. So we have that very positive scenario, or the other scenario where it's very said, well, the thing about our community, or BME communities, they actually have an aspiration to have social housing. Not even, some people think, oh, I'll never be in social housing. You know, we have our communities who, you know, just want to be in social housing because they're affordable and they're high. Now, we have 54 units, I think around 31 single bed units and the rest family units. And the one bed units, the average rent there is about £155 a week, and our family units, I think we've got one four bedroom unit, four-bedroom house, and that's more like £220. The average rent in London for a one-bedroom flat is about £500 a week, and you're lucky. Excuse me, you're lucky if you get that. But don't forget, you have to think about the deposit you have to put down, and also you have to, you know, be the right type of tenant. So then you'll think about, okay, what type of housing are many communities living in if they can't even access those accommodations, and they've got the money, and there are barriers there. So, you know, it paints a very kind of horrific picture. Now this is our timeline. We were founded in 1985. And essentially we were part of the BME housing strategy in 1985. The Housing Corporation decided to have a strategy to register a number of BME organisations, and the reason for this was that the FBHO, there's a lot of kind of community activism, and remember this is kind of like post-riots, and a lot of community activists were now you know, engaging the housing organisation and saying, you know, we need, you know, our fair share. And obviously with the Scarman report, who found that, or his findings were that, you know, these communities need to have more of a stake in society. I think at one very loud revolutionary meeting, the head of the Housing Corporation went to the FBHO conference, and he said, you know, he really got, how could I say, he got peppered in that meeting, and he had a couple of lieutenants, and you know, they declared that they didn't know the situation was so grave, and you know, to give credit to them, they started an initiative that really kind of like was quite unique in Europe, because essentially I think they ended up within a 10-year, well, I think that 2000, well, in a 10-year period, investing over £660 million in developing organisations and people providing capital grants to develop homes. So we do in this country have a BME-led housing sector, but as you can see in 1996, I think around 120 organisations were registered. But if you know anything about activism, you know people kind of like protest, and then you know when they get what they want, they have to go there. Now they have to manage the businesses, and this was very much, I think, one of the challenges for the sector, because essentially the people who make the most noise maybe are not always the best managers, and even if they could manage appropriately, you know, you have the system effect, which now kind of like filters and almost kind of like weeds people out. And you know, ourselves as an organisation, within a 10-year period, I think we got inspected by the Housing Corporation, who was the regulator at the time, almost about 4 times. And I've got to say to you that experience was like almost having really kind of like overzealous, you know, agents of the state, almost, you know, questioning, you know, our ability to manage public funds. So, you know, there is a story before community-led housing, and interestingly enough, I think within the housing sector, there's so many people that have actually gone through the community-led or co-op sector. You know, and I think I made a reference that a lot of the Woolly Jumper Brigade, you know, ended up being kind of like the corporate bosses for now. So a lot of people in the housing sector, dynamics of housing, but if you think about the consumerist capitalist model that we actually live in, you know, as you get older and dynamics change within your life, you have different needs, and you know, your idealism for when you're really young, kind of like, you know, it changes. So I mean, I would speak to the room and think, you know, ask people to look and reconcile that, because that is always a kind of like a massive challenge. Because as we grow older, we lose our idealism, and I think you said, we become a little bit more pragmatic, and you know, we try to get the best that we can out of a situation. Now, we have got real revolutionary roots, in as much as our organisation was originally called Amilcar Cabral, and Amilcar Cabral was a revolutionary fight in Guinea-Bissau in the early 70s, and that's what we actually registered our name as. But the Housing Corporation at the time said that no, you can't politically, you know, because of the political influence, you know, you have to change your name. So I think I just touched on what the model, those are the model cooperative rules. So I think very early on we understood the game. I think what happened is we were uninitiated. We just wanted homes, and you know, we just found ourselves in a room where somebody said, yeah, you know, do you want to start a housing co-op? Not knowing it was kind of like part of this kind of like wider strategy to get X amount of organisations across the line. And I think there were a few of us that were either in community development, I think a couple of people in housing at the time, that heard the term, the money had been allocated, and we knew that, you know, that there was a goal, so, you know, we kind of like just went with it. Now, this slide is
of Roy Hackett in terms of the Bristol bus boycott. So there is a tradition here as well that we've got to tap into and not forget about that. And I think my final sort of reflection on that is around this thing around rights don't achieve anything, or uprisings. But I mean, when I went back and looked at every single thing that happened for the black community from 1985 to 1986 came directly as a consequence of the riots. That's the investment in 5 major initiatives in St Paul's, and you could go around Toxteth, Handsworth, Chapeltown and see the same picture. So there is something around how do we tap into that spirit as well and revive it. So that's the end of my soapbox rant. I just want to really now open some questions to folk, to any of the panellists. Who's first up? Have any questions? Yeah, do you want to say who you are as well, which organisation you're from? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. My name's Lucy Warren, and I work for Transition by Design. We're a cooperative architecture and design practice based in Oxford. And I have recently been a part of a study that the NEON, the New Economic Organisers Network, have been doing around like the housing movement and looking at the housing movement post-COVID and more generally, and what can be done to strengthen it. And one of the key things in their report they found was there's this real split between people who have the technical skills, like people in this room, community-led housing sector, broader housing sector, and the movement, you know, the renters' rights movement, the people who are putting effort and energy into it from a place of housing need. And they really identified that on the movement side, there's a real lack of skills and knowledge, some quite fundamental misunderstandings about how land and housing work. And then on the kind of like the room of people who have that technical skills, there's very little outreach into that movement, into that world of movement building and community organising. And it sounds like, especially like Helen and Justin, you've kind of had small experiences of that, and I wondered if you could share any like good examples of when that has happened well. Because Justin, it sounds like you've had some great support. Helen, it sounds like you've had some amazing experience. And I feel like as a room, we probably all need to do more of that, and I'd love to hear some good examples.
Okay, there's a challenge for examples. Yeah, Kristen as well.
Yeah, no, it's been really useful, especially with CLH West, the finance side and the administrative side, which is completely arcane to us. And bearing in mind we're all, you know, students of the social sciences at Russell Group University. Like, if anyone is, you know, systematically inclined to, I don't know, be able to engage with these kind of things, we would be better off for that. But it was still so arcane and so confusing, and we were just very convenient to have sort of links to places like CLH West. We just wouldn't have that kind of information. I think certainly contact was the hardest thing. I think we were just very sort of serendipitous that we knew someone who knew someone in CLH West, and if we didn't have that, we probably have just given up a long time ago. Wouldn't have got off the ground.
Yeah, the best experience was with Sheldon Road. They had in-house architects, and they operated on a cooperative model. So that was the perfect world. I think the worst of that relationship was, like I said, the example I gave really, and the subsequent one where they had their own self-interest, and it was kind of like clear from the get-go. And I suppose as a group, you, after a while, you know, once you've built trust and you know your kind of own identity, you can hear when somebody's making a pitch, whether or not they're genuine or not. And I think that's one of the challenges, issues for kind of like practices, because essentially you have to get paid, but you've also got that altruistic motive as well. So it's about maybe finding those spaces where effectively architects can like search out and maybe have a certain amount of pro bono work within their, you know, within their business.
Yeah, I do want to say something, because I think it should be turned the other way around. I think that the issue is, why is the system so complicated? Why is it that people have to try and fit into the system? And why should they? I mean, you know, people just want a decent home to live in a community. They shouldn't have to be experts about the planning process, and it's almost like, it feels like you're being tripped up all the time, or it's just another hurdle to get over. And that's why the energy and the commitment required to stick with that, and then convince, you're trying to convince somebody of that something's good, and it's obviously really good, and it just feels wrong. There's so much energy in that, and so I therefore, there needs to be systematic change to make that accessible to people, because you know most people can talk and understand. So why make it so complicated? I mean, just an example on the student housing one. So I'm not saying, of course, we have to be accountable and auditable, and I've been inspected before, and I think they could work for the Secret Service. Their interrogation techniques are superb, and they absolutely know how to triangulate questions. But so I know with the student co-op, I chair an organisation called Westworks, which is a procurement consortium, and they needed to hire, to go out to tender to hire a surveyor. They have to do that in an accountable way because it is public money, and they want to, and they also want to make sure that they get a credible organisation to do the job. So because we understand it at Westworks, it's like, how can we turn this around quickly? How do we support them to write the brief and turn it around, because they needed it turned around within a couple of weeks? It doesn't have to be really complicated. I just think there's too many people that make a job out of it, making it complicated.
Over to Christina.
Marshfield CRT has been very dependent, as I said, on people who have actually got experience and skills. But we haven't had any problem at all about the way in which those of us who set the CLT up and are passionate about making it work have worked with those experts. I think because they themselves recognise that the community-led and community-based nature of our project is what actually makes it special and what makes it work. So while we have had huge help with being pointed in the right direction, we've also learned a great deal and haven't actually had any difficulties in the two working together. I think you need the right sort of people, but people, our advisor and the Housing Association that's chosen to work with us have chosen to work with a community-led project and know that therefore the enthusiasm and the drive of the people who are mounting that project is very important. So while we've been very dependent upon them, I don't think they've been leading the project, they've just helped us with knowledge and experience when we've needed it.
Thank you, Christine. I know we recently, with CLH West as well, ran a a workshop raising the roof with community anchor organisations, so largely based in the working class periphery of Bristol, and there were similar issues raised in the context of social capital and the access to pro bono support, and some of those dark arts of navigating professional arrangements. And there's definitely a race equality and institutional racism challenge to that, which is quite deep-seated. There's also an issue around class as well, and I think, you know, the CLT movement definitely needs to be alive to that. Right, anyway, still on the soapbox, so I'm going to bring another question in. Anyone else? Yeah, I'm going to bring some new people in. So, Tom. Okay, you're a panelist. Go on, Tom.
Not quite new. I want to ask Khaled, so, you know, very inspired by your story. You say you've got 54 homes, and this is not in any way to diminish what you've achieved, but obviously every year in London there are 25,000 homes built, of which maybe 5 to 10,000 built by housing associations. I just wonder, if you could flip this round, if you could have control over how all of those affordable homes are built, is there something from your story where you think that could be just changing the way that we could do affordable housing in London? Or is this a story about a very particular thing about you and individuals involved in this, and that's very hard to see how that could scale and replicate?
I think, you know, if you've been involved in a co-op, you see the world through a different lens. I don't know, like I said, I talked about kind of idealism, and you have kind of like a blank sheet which you come from to be creative. Whereas if you work with an operational, organisational culture, you know, you're constricted. You know, unless you're a very dynamic chief executive and you're well networked and you've got, you know, your reputation precedes you, so you've actually got power. So you're asking me to flip. You're saying flip the script. You're giving me the power, and it just doesn't work like that. And I, you know, whilst I appreciate the luxury of you kind of asking me that question, I think, you know, there is something about us being in the time that we're in and having access to knowledge. Lots of people know that we can be creative. We can work it out with this environmental crisis. We have to work it out. So that should maybe empower people to be a little bit more kind of courageous in their day job, to challenge. There's no better time than now for us to challenge the status quo and say, why aren't we doing it? And what you know, as the crow flies, what is the straight direction in order to do it? So I think I would kind of put it back on you and say, well, you know, what are you doing in your space to really challenge the kind of like hierarchical system that sometimes make massive mistakes? If we look at the government and all the white elephants that have gone over the last 15, 20 years, if somebody was to add that up, that would be a horrific amount of money. So somebody really should be accountable for that money, or if there's a mistake made in that money, then they should take some money in and put it at the front line. You know, so, you know, we've got to seek to hold our governors to more account, and especially in terms of the way they spend money, because there are a lot of wasted money. I could go on about kind of like the criminal justice system, when they yanked out all of the local authority money that put all these kind of social, you know, they used to have youth service and stuff like that. We knew as soon as they cut the youth service, then there was going to be an implication for the criminal justice system, especially if you was of a darker skin. You know, we knew that years ago. We knew that the guns were coming. You know, so it's not that, you know, we didn't have the solutions, but, you know, we weren't in a position in society that we could influence the decisions that would be made. So you asking me that question is kind of like, well, you know, we've been there before, and I haven't had that luxury. And what I try to use is the platforms that I have to really ask a truthful question of the questioner, and saying, okay, well, you know, it's really on you.
Thanks for that, Khaled. Very powerful. Anyone want to add anything to that?
I don't think I can.
It's a tough one to follow. Right, we're really short of time, and I want to bring new people in who haven't spoken so far. So, short questions, please. Can I throw that out to who is being a bit nervous about asking a question? Now's your chance just to jump up. Any questions? Okay. I know that gentleman down. Oh, Chris Children. Right, now you've already been on the panel, so I'm going to get this gentleman in. Short, sharp question, please, sir.
In terms of the student housing cooperative, are the members of it those, the most active members, those from the most deprived socioeconomic backgrounds, or is it a range across the typical Russell Group student? I ask that because if it's the typical Russell Group student, they often have lots of pro bono potential advice within families or friends.
Okay, so that was about, sorry for those hard of hearing, I appreciate we haven't got mics rolling around, but that was about membership of the cooperative. Julian, do you want to just...
Yeah, no, that's totally true. And it really harks back to something Paul said a minute ago about the sort of cultural capital and the sort of, you know, being able to navigate a very middle class world with something like housing and surveillancy and things like that. I don't think we've benefited. So to directly answer your question, yes, the main group of us organising it are from stereotypical Brussels group middle class backgrounds. But not knowing anyone in the housing industry, directly or through families, that hasn't directly benefited us. It's been through things like the student union, and we've had a lot of help through, I can't quite remember his name, but a gentleman who used to be student living officer at the SU, who now works for the Bath, Bristol, something.
Exactly, Stephen LeFan.
That was the one, yeah, Stephen LeFan. Yeah, so no, we've had a lot of help through connections through the university, but absolutely we've benefited from the cultural capital of being able to navigate a very middle class space. So I don't think we would have got as far as if we couldn't do that.
Thanks, Julian. Right, so we've got time for one last question. If no one other than Chris is going to ask, who hasn't spoken before, I'm going to give Mr. Chilkley the last question.
Okay.
No one's daring to cut across you there, sir, and they know they'd be banned from Stokes Croft if they did. So, Chris, do you want to speak nice and loudly? Because I'm conscious there's people with hearing challenges here as well.
I think I only know how to speak loudly, to be quite
True.
honest.
I didn't want to say that though.
Today we've heard lots of really interesting ideas. How do we get these ideas out into mass world? How do we actually push these messages into the areas where we're not speaking to ourselves? That's my question.
Okay, so that's a question about speaking outside of our echo chamber, I guess, and speaking. I guess each one of you could probably speak for an hour and a half on that subject. I'm looking at the clock, we've got 2 minutes. So maybe 1 or 2 bullet points each, please, would be great. And Lindy, you've got the mic.
Yeah, well, I think we are today. There are people in the room today from local authorities who are genuinely committed to trying to support this sector to make the difference that it knows it can. So I think, yeah, I want it to happen yesterday, of course, but you know, there are people here, and that's who we're influencing.
Yeah, I'd just say, I assume you're all fairly in touch with CLH West, but yeah, go through a facilitator. We wouldn't have found any of this if it weren't for them.
Yeah, I would say that everybody here needs to, you know, wherever your engagement is with the group, or wherever your home base is, make sure you make a point of giving, you know, really good feedback about your experience, and, you know, ask yourself the question: what change are we going to make?
Christine. Right, who's Christine?
Just tear up.
Sorry, I think she's got it.
I think that you write to your MP, you write to the Secretary of State for what is now levelling up, you get to events, you talk to people, you change people's minds, and every time you change someone's mind in your own community, you do affect that wider issue about getting through to the outside world.
Thanks very much, and great final question as well, Chris. I really appreciate that. So this draws this section to a close. So I just want to begin by thanking Christine, all the way from the forests of Marshfield, for joining us live on Satellite Dish. I'd like to thank Lindy and Julian as well, and a big thank you to Khalid, who came down to share that very inspirational story from London as well. Round of applause to the panel, please. Now over to Jessie to close, or to introduce the last session before we close. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was brilliant. And we are just now going to wrap up. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you to all of the speakers that we've heard from today. And I won't have the last word, I'm going to hand that over to Steve Dale. But I just wanted to say it has been an incredible afternoon. I think exploring the opportunities and the power that community-led housing really has to play. From hearing from those that are leading the way in this space, from hearing from people that are in positions of influence that can enable this a lot more, from hearing stories of those that have trodden the path and are indeed walking the path out as we speak. I think it's been really inspirational. I said at the very beginning of this afternoon that we are facing a multitude of challenges that are kind of all cross-cutting and intermingling and make for a really complex web of things that we're trying to navigate in this community, in Bristol, in the region and nationally. We really are facing lots of different challenges from that kind of post-pandemic recovery through to the climate emergency, through to our housing crisis. And community-led housing, it has been said so many times throughout today, is an essential solution, an essential part of this. We're really delighted that we've been able to help host this event as part of the Bristol Housing Festival, this 2-week lineup of events. Please do check out our website if you want to come to any of the more events. But I'm just going to hand over to Steve for the final word. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Jessie. Thanks, everyone. I'm furiously typing.